Hey guys, tonight we're slipping back in time to a place where the walls are stone, the ceilings are high, and insulation is, well, barely invented. You're in a medieval castle. It's winter. The hearth fire's low, the wind howls through arrow slits, and guess what? You're expected to get some sleep here. So, yeah, you probably won't survive this, but that's half the fun, right? So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'm curious. What city are you watching from, and what time is it right now? Drop it in the comments. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step through the massive wooden door of the castle and immediately feel it. The bite of cold air, thick and damp, seeping through the stones. Everything smells faintly of smoke, tallow and old wood. You know those fairy tales where castles are grand and glowing with torchlight? Yeah. Real castles were a bit more brutal. Especially in the dead of winter, you're not exactly greeted by warmth. Instead, you feel like you've walked into a giant medieval refrigerator with a high ceiling and poor lighting. You look up and see that the torches lining the walls don't do much. They sputter in the drafts, casting twitchy shadows that make the stone walls look like they're breathing. And it's not just the temperature that's unsettling. It's the sheer awareness that no part of this structure is designed for comfort. It's for defense, for longevity, for intimidation. Warmth? That's a side quest. Your breath fogs in front of your face as you're shown to the place you'll be sleeping tonight, which is less a room and more a small chamber behind a heavy wooden door. There's a fire, but it's small and losing its will to live. The hearth sits inside a wall that's colder than your ex's text messages. You go to warm your hands and realise how little heat is actually radiating into the room. You sit on the edge of the bed, if you can call it that. It's a raised wooden frame with a rope lattice crisscrossed beneath a stuffed mattress. The mattress is lumpy and slightly damp. Welcome to your straw-stuffed reality. The linens are rough, made of unbleached wool and coarse flax, and they smell faintly of mildew and humanity. Still, you pull them up to your chin and try not to think about how long it's been since any of this was washed. Spoiler, long, like Crusades, long. As you try to settle in, the wind outside howls again, this time through a small glassless window shuttered with wooden slats. Every creak and groan of the castle echoes, magnified by the open chambers and stone walls. There's a very real chance a rat just skittered across the rafters above you. Or maybe that was just your imagination. Either way, sleep's gonna be aspirational tonight. So how did people actually survive this? I mean, night after night in what is essentially a glorified cave? Well, first, you have to understand the medieval mindset. Comfort wasn't the baseline, it was a luxury. Warmth wasn't assumed, it was earned. Most people layered up during the day and just kept everything on at night. Sleep was more of a necessity than an event. You didn't climb into bed with a cup of tea and a podcast queued up. You crashed, fully dressed, under whatever layers you could muster, hoping not to wake up with frostbitten toes. Here's a weird little fact for you. Those massive stone walls that look so impressive from the outside, total heat traps. They absorb the chill during the day and release it at night, so your room actually gets colder the longer you try to sleep in it. Lovely, right? Now, let's talk about the psychological effects of sleeping in cold, damp, barely lit chambers. Scholars still argue about how people coped. Some say the body acclimates over time. Others suggest that medieval people simply had different thresholds for comfort, because they had no choice. And then there's the theory that their segmented sleep patterns, waking for a couple hours in the middle of the night, were a direct result of discomfort. You wake up cold, shift positions, toss on another log, and then go back to bed. Sort of a built-in snooze button. The thing is, most of us are soft. You've probably got a memory foam mattress, double-paned windows, and a thermostat that can be adjusted by voice. Here, none of that. You make your heat with your body and hope your bedmate doesn't have plague, which by the way was a legitimate concern. The first night you spend here, you're hyper-aware of every sound, every gust of wind. You try to wrap yourself tighter in the blankets, but the cold finds every crack. The stone floor radiates a deep chill and the fire dies out by midnight. It's only now you realise that even lighting a fire is a complicated art in the Middle Ages. Chimneys are a relatively new invention, and most fires are smoky and inefficient. If you keep it going, you might avoid freezing, but good luck breathing. By 3 a.m, you're awake again, teeth chattering, curled up in the fetal position, seriously questioning your life choices, but around you, the castle sleeps. People have done this night after night, winter after winter. Somehow they survive, some even thrive. And the funny thing, they considered this a step up from living in a hut with no windows and a mud floor. Nobles slept in castles. Castles were the dream. You're just visiting. The next night you're shown to the Great Hall, not because you've suddenly been upgraded, but because tonight you're experiencing how most people in a medieval castle actually slept. And no, it's not in a cosy chamber of your own. It's right here, in the middle of a communal space that smells like roasted meat, old ale, and human breath. Welcome to the medieval version of a sleepover, except no one's here for ghost stories or nail painting. They're here to not die of exposure. As the fire in the central hearth crackles low, the heat stretches only so far. People have already begun settling down on rush-strewn floors, with cloaks rolled into makeshift pillows and dogs curled up at their feet. It's one big, uncomfortable pile of humans, all doing their best to catch some sleep before the cold seeps in again. You stake out your spot near the hearth, because proximity is everything here. The further you are from the fire, the more likely you are to wake up with icicles in your nostrils. You lay down on a rough wool blanket and try to make yourself as small as possible. There's a servant snoring not 3 feet from you, and someone else has just loudly broken wind in their sleep. Lovely. But here's the thing. This kind of sleeping arrangement wasn't just for the lower classes. Even in wealthier households, especially in earlier parts of the Middle Ages, privacy was rare. A lord might sleep in the hall surrounded by his men, partially for protection, and partially because it was just warmer that way. All those bodies together meant shared warmth, and shared warmth meant you were slightly less likely to wake up blue-lipped. And yeah, it sounds awful now, like some strange dystopian hostel, but it worked. The idea of a private bedroom didn't really catch on until the later medieval period. Until then, the Great Hall was the place where everything happened. Meals, meetings, music, and at night, sleep. The fire would be banked, the torches extinguished, and everyone would settle in together like one big involuntary family. You try to sleep, but every time someone shifts you jolt awake. A log pops in the hearth, and your brain briefly thinks, attack. The combination of creaking wood, echoing footsteps from some other part of the castle, and the occasional clink of armour hanging on the wall keeps your imagination busy. Add in the sounds of coughing, muttering, and at least one person talking in their sleep, and it's kind of a miracle anyone got any rest at all. You turn over, facing the fire, and start to feel a little warmer. There's something oddly comforting about this scene, though. People gathered in community, enduring the cold together, not suffering alone in separate rooms. This wasn't just a necessity, it was a strategy. Body heat is one of the most basic tools for survival, and the medieval world leaned into it hard. And now, a little historical nugget to chew on. In many great halls, floors were covered with rushes. Think dried grasses or straw, sometimes mixed with herbs like lavender or mint. The idea was that these layers absorbed spills and smells, and the herbs helped combat the stench. Did it work? Not really. After a few weeks, the rushes would be infested with fleas, bits of food, and other unspeakables. So when you lie down tonight, maybe try not to think about what's under you. Still, some scholars argue that the Great Hall sleeping arrangement wasn't just for warmth or status. It could be about trust. In a world where enemies lurked and betrayal was a real threat, being surrounded by your own people at night might have felt like the safest place to be. Or maybe it was just too dang cold to argue. A more fringe theory out there? Some historians believe certain noble families used communal sleeping to deliberately keep households close-knit, blurring the lines between servants and masters, lords and retainers. Warmth might have been the excuse, but social control could have been the motive. You wake up before dawn to the sounds of stirring. Someone is poking the fire back to life. The air has that crisp, painful chill that hits your lungs like a punch. Your joints ache, and your shoulder feels like you slept on a bag of rocks, probably because you did. The rushes beneath you have shifted, and your blanket has betrayed you in the night, bunching around your ankles. One of the kitchen staff brings in hot water in a large wooden bucket. People start to shuffle toward it, rubbing their hands, desperate to thaw out their fingers. You do the same, crouching low, steam rising into your face. It helps, but only a little. Someone offers you a hunk of cold bread and a look that says, "You'll get used to it." You nod, pretending that your modern soul isn't silently screaming for coffee and central heating. So, if you're ever time travelling to the 13th century and looking for a place to sleep, don't expect a private suite with heated floors. Expect the Great Hall, a wool blanket, a dog at your feet, and at least 3 strangers breathing suspiciously close to your face. And remember, if the fire goes out, you'll all freeze together. Isn't that kind of poetic? You managed to survive another night, though you can't say you slept so much as you survived horizontally. But tonight, things are going to be a little different. You're led away from the Great Hall, thank the medieval gods, and into a smaller, slightly more private chamber tucked away behind a wooden screen. You're here to try out the bedding, and no, not a mattress as you know it. We're talking about medieval sleep setups, feathers, furs, and an impressive number of filthy, reused layers. The first thing you notice about the room is the smell. It's a pungent combination of wool, tallow candles, and that ever-present background musk of unwashed bodies from the 1300s. You're already used to it, sort of, but it still hits your modern nose like a musty handshake. The floor is wooden this time, an upgrade from the rush-strewn stone, but warped and creaky. Above you, exposed beams support a thatched roof, and you can actually see your breath misting in the dim firelight. Again. You approach the bed and try not to grimace. It looks inviting if you squint, and keep your modern knowledge out of it. There's a feather-stuffed mattress atop a rope lattice frame, the rope sagging a bit in the middle like a hammock that's given up. Someone hands you a bed key, a flat wooden tool shaped like a paddle, and tells you to tighten the bed. Yes, that's a real thing. You lean over and start twisting the ropes tighter, cranking the slack out of the structure until it resembles something vaguely firm. You flop onto it for a test. Not bad. If you ignore the smell of ancient feathers and the suspicious crunch near your left hip. Now for the layers. First, there's a wool sheet, then a thicker woolen blanket, then 2 furs, 1 sheep, 1 something unidentifiable but possibly raccoon adjacent. At the foot of the bed, there's another thick roll of fabric stuffed with straw, acting as a bolster. This is medieval layering at its finest. The idea is insulation through mass. The more layers between you and the cold, the better. Of course, none of this is regularly washed. Linens, maybe, but the furs? Not unless someone spilled ale on them, and even then, probably just a quick rinse in the river and back onto the bed. So as you snuggle in under the mountain of fabrics, try to pretend you're not sharing it with a thriving ecosystem of lice, fleas, and mystery crumbs. And here's something you might not expect. People didn't sleep naked back then. Not even close. The idea of stripping down before bed was just not done. You keep your underclothes on, linen shirt, woolen hose, and maybe add a second shirt if you're lucky. In some cases, folks even slept in their outerwear, heavy cloaks doubled as bed covers. Your body heat is all you've got, and you're not wasting it on the cold air between your skin and the sheets. There's a historical fact for you. Feather beds were a sign of wealth, but not uncommon among the moderately well-off by the 14th century. Even some peasants had them, often inherited or self-made with collected feathers. They didn't have IKEA, but they had geese, lots of them, and the downy underfeathers were perfect for stuffing mattresses, bolsters, and even pillows if you were fancy. But here's the fringe detail. In some parts of medieval Europe, people believed that feather beds could be dangerous. Specifically, there were superstitions that evil spirits or illness could become trapped in the mattress, especially if someone died in it. Some households actually burned old beds after a death to avoid whatever haunted vapours might linger. You lie back and suddenly wonder who used this mattress last. It smells complicated. You wrap yourself tightly in the blankets and try not to think about it. The heat does begin to build though. The furs, the feathers, your 3 layers of clothing, they trap everything in, and after a few minutes you're no longer shaking with cold. Your feet, still wearing thick wool socks, start to tingle as the warmth returns. You stare at the low wooden ceiling and realise something strange. This feels almost cosy. If you block out the facts, the lice, the dirt, the ghosts, it's kind of like camping, hardcore medieval-style camping. The fire flickers in the hearth across the room, casting an orange glow over the walls. A tapestry depicting some nobleman stabbing a boar stares back at you from above the fireplace. Charming. As you drift closer to sleep, you start to understand why people got attached to their beds. These weren't just places to sleep. They were status symbols, family heirlooms, even financial assets. A well-made bed could be passed down for generations. In some wills, beds were specifically named, "My good feather bed, with all its coverings," and bequeathed to children or siblings like they were prized possessions. Because they were. There's some debate among scholars over whether bedding quality really translated to better sleep in the medieval period. Some argue that the uneven, lumpy stuffing and lack of hygiene would have made rest intermittent and uncomfortable. Others suggest that because people's daily lives were so physically demanding, farming, walking, climbing stone stairs, most were exhausted enough to sleep deeply regardless of comfort. And here's a quirky little fact to end your night. Medieval Europeans sometimes believed that sleeping on your back invited the devil to sit on your chest and tempt you in dreams. Side sleeping was preferred, especially facing away from your bedmate. Not for romance, mind you, just fewer temptations. So if you roll over and feel a slight weight on your chest tonight, maybe just, ignore it. The fire burns low, the wind moans gently outside the stone walls. You shift beneath your mound of bedding and sigh. Warm now, still a little itchy, but not freezing. You can't help but admire their ingenuity. This whole setup is a mix of practicality, superstition, and a whole lot of good enough, and somehow it works. Tonight, you're in for a treat. A rare peek inside the private bedchamber of a high-ranking noble, not some drafty group hall or dusty servant's nook, but an actual room meant for one or two people, which in medieval terms is basically the equivalent of winning the lottery. You're ushered through a thick wooden door that creaks ominously as it swings open, revealing a space bathed in soft candlelight. Instantly, you notice the difference. It's warmer, not warm per se, but definitely less bone-deep chill and more, well, I can probably sleep without crying. The bed dominates the room. It's massive, carved oak posts twisting upward like miniature towers, holding up a canopy of heavy embroidered fabric. The drapes hang thick and dark around all four sides of the bed, a medieval version of blackout curtains with insulation. You step closer and run your hand along the material. Velvet on one side, coarse wool backing on the other. These weren't just decorative, they were functional. They trapped body heat inside the bed space, turning it into a tiny warm bubble in a very cold world. The floor beneath your feet is covered in layered rugs, thick, woven wool that muffles your steps and keeps the chill of the stone at bay. That alone feels luxurious after the bare floors you've been dealing with. A fire crackles softly in the hearth across the room, the chimney cleverly built into the outer wall. You can still feel a draft near the narrow windows, but the sheer volume of fabric in the room helps. Tapestries cover most of the stone surfaces, depicting biblical scenes, hunting expeditions, and the occasional half-naked saint because medieval people were complicated like that. You move closer to the bed and notice the finer details. The mattress is deep and plush, likely stuffed with feathers, goose down, or even a mix of moss and straw beneath the top layer. There's a headboard carved with intricate scrollwork and family crests, and the pillows, real pillows, are stacked neatly at the head of the bed. You reach out and press one, and it gives just slightly before springing back. A far cry from the lumpy sack of feathers you slept on last night. Next to the bed is a small wooden stand with a basin and pitcher, as well as a candle holder and a heavy iron box with a hinged lid. You crack it open and grin. It's a bed warmer, lined with hot coals. This, you realise, is one of the ways the upper crust cheated death by draught. Before bed, a servant would heat the coals in the fire, place them in the box and run it under the sheets to warm them up before their lord or lady slipped in. You can imagine the hiss and the puff of steam as it hit slightly damp linens. You do your best not to think about what might happen if that thing flipped over in your sleep. Probably not ideal. You slip under the bed covers, several layers of linen, wool and fur, and pull the drapes closed behind you. The transformation is instant. The air inside the curtain is noticeably warmer. Your breath no longer hangs in front of your face, and the fire's flicker is now just a soft rhythmic glow beyond the veil of fabric. You hear less of the wind and none of the voices from the hallway. This isn't just warmth, it's privacy, which, in a medieval castle, is practically mythological. Now here's your historical fact of the night. Noble bedrooms weren't just for sleeping. They were often multifunctional spaces where business was conducted, letters were written, and guests might be received. Yes, even while the noble was reclining in bed. Some noblewomen even gave birth publicly in these rooms, surrounded by attendants and family members, because privacy wasn't always the point. Comfort, status, control, those were the priorities. The fringe fact. In some noble houses, beds were so elaborate and expensive they were disassembled and carried along on travels. That's right. Imagine travelling with your own portable bed, complete with tapestries and mattress, because local accommodations just weren't up to snuff. Some beds had engraved headboards so distinct that stolen ones could be identified like a stolen Picasso. You lie there and take it all in, the layers of blankets, the drapes pressing down on all sides, the occasional creak of wooden beams above. This isn't your world, but you're starting to understand how it worked. They didn't have central heating, but they had solutions, clever ones, layered ones, human ones. There's debate among scholars over how often nobles actually got to enjoy these luxuries. Some argue that noblewomen, in particular, were confined to these bedchambers during long winters, surrounded by handmaids, spinning wool, reading prayers, and trying not to freeze. Others suggest that such private rooms were more symbolic, showpieces to impress visiting dignitaries, while actual sleeping happened elsewhere. You pull the furs tighter around you and shift to your side. This is definitely the warmest you've been since you arrived. The bed has its own atmosphere now, heavy with heat and the smell of wool and candle wax. You can hear your own heartbeat, the kind of silence that's almost unnerving. But there's something else too, a feeling of safety. Yes, the world outside is freezing and unpredictable and full of rats. But inside this curtained bed you're wrapped in layers of effort. Layers of people trying to make things bearable. This isn't just a bed, it's architecture, it's defence. It's a personal fortress built of fabric, feathers, and a healthy fear of pneumonia. You close your eyes, there's the occasional pop from the fire, the gentle hush of wind against the outer stones. But inside your cocoon you're floating in stillness. The chill doesn't reach you here, not tonight. The next morning you're reluctant to leave the cocoon of the noble bed. Who wouldn't be? It's the warmest, most insulated place you've experienced since arriving in this gloriously uncomfortable century. But today's mission involves an even closer inspection of that magnificent piece of furniture you just slept in, the medieval four-poster bed. And trust me, this thing is more than just a fancy rectangle with some curtains. It's a technological marvel in a world without thermostats or double glazing. After a quick splash of cold water from a ceramic basin, because showers are centuries away and you're still not ready to commit to the medieval hygiene aesthetic, you circle back to the bed and give it a closer look. The four posts stand like small trees at each corner, thick and ornately carved, rising up to support a wooden canopy known as a tester. Think of it as the bed's roof. This wasn't just for grandeur. That canopy kept out the cold air dropping from high ceilings, shielded your face from drafts, and in some cases even stopped the occasional rodent from falling on you during the night. You know, the usual threats to a peaceful REM cycle. You tug back the thick curtains and notice how they're looped on rings that can be drawn completely shut around the entire bed. Once sealed, it's like being inside your own portable room, dark, warm, and muffled against the castle's nightly sounds. That medieval version of blackout curtains you experienced? It's doing a lot more than you realised. It's not just privacy, it's physics, trapping heat, dimming light, dampening noise. It's medieval luxury engineering. And here's something most people don't realise. These beds weren't even pushed against walls like modern ones. Nope. They often sat centred in the room or away from the coldest surfaces. Why? Airflow. Castle walls were known to weep in the winter, condensation from poor insulation, and the chill of exterior stone. Placing the bed in open space meant fewer mouldy, damp surprises on your pillow. You crouch down and peek underneath the bed frame. The mattress rests on a lattice of ropes crisscrossed and tied taut, hence the phrase, sleep tight. Every few nights, those ropes had to be retightened using a bed key to keep the mattress from sagging. If left alone, the whole thing would start to dip like an old trampoline, and you'd wake up in a feather-stuffed canyon. So yes, sleeping tight was a real practical concern, not just an old-timey phrase your grandma used. Here's your historical fact of the evening. Four-poster beds date back to at least the 14th century, and became more common in wealthier homes during the late Middle Ages. By the 15th century, they were considered not just functional, but deeply symbolic. Owning one signalled wealth, power, and the ability to avoid freezing to death in the middle of January. Some even had family crests carved into the headboards or embroidered onto the curtain fabric. They weren't just beds, they were status monuments you could nap in. But of course, nothing comes without a weird twist. Here's your fringe fact. In some households, the curtains were also used to conceal activities, not just from wandering eyes, but from spirits. Yep. There were genuine beliefs that bed curtains could keep evil spirits or night demons, like the infamous Mara or night hag, from reaching you while you slept. Close the curtains, stay warm, and block out the supernatural. Efficiency. Thy name is bed curtain. You lie back on the mattress and pull the canopy curtains mostly closed again, leaving just a crack for firelight to slip through. The air inside warms quickly, especially with your body wrapped in fur and linen. You can actually hear the difference. Outside the bed, footsteps echo, fires pop, and someone is dragging a log across the stone. Inside. It's a soft hush, broken only by the occasional creak of the ropes beneath you. There's some scholarly debate about just how common these beds were and who really had access to them. Some historians argue that only the very elite had 4 posters with all the trimmings, while others suggest that by the 15th century, many upwardly mobile households had some version of them. The materials varied. Richer folks had oak or walnut, while others used pine or even painted wood with simpler curtains. The basics were the same, but the vibe? Well, your current bed says, I rule over lands and collect taxes. The peasant version says, I stole this curtain from a tavern and nailed it to a stick. You reach up and touch the underside of the tester above your head. Some nobles would actually decorate this part of the bed, painting it with stars, saints, or elaborate patterns. It was the last thing you saw before you drifted off, so why not make it beautiful? If you're going to fall asleep to anything, it might as well be a lovingly painted halo of angels instead of exposed beams and spider webs. And yes, there were spiders. Still are. You're sharing this castle with an entire ecosystem. From the flies buzzing around the chamber pot to the mice nesting behind the tapestries. But inside this bed, behind your curtain fortress, you get a temporary escape. It's one of the few places in the castle designed purely for human comfort, and even that's relative. Tonight the fire burns steady, and the room's chill doesn't creep in like it used to. You feel prepared. The heavy canopy overhead, the drapes sealed tight, the wool layers swaddling you like some medieval burrito. For the first time you realise this was the goal. This was the best case scenario. Warmth, privacy, and just enough cushioning to make the aches from your wooden shoes go away for a few blissful hours. As your eyes close, you start to forget the cold stone outside, the draft in the corridor, the smell of unwashed bodies wafting from down the hall. Right now, it's just you, your absurdly thick mattress, and the quiet hum of survival. You're finally mastering the medieval sleep game. Not bad for a modern time traveller. Tonight, you're staying put in the noble bedchamber, but you're not here to admire the fancy carved furniture or test the tension of rope mattresses. Tonight is all about your wardrobe, or more specifically, the fact that you're still wearing it. Because in the medieval world, sleepwear wasn't really a thing. There were no cosy pyjama sets, no drawstring flannel pants, no oversized sweatshirts stolen from your crush. Nope. You went to bed in what you were already wearing, or if you were feeling wild, maybe you stripped down to your underwear. Maybe you glanced down at yourself, a linen shift, woolen hose, and a cloak you haven't taken off in days. You're definitely warmer than you were during that first miserable night on the rush-covered floor, but comfort is still a negotiable concept. The linen shift is scratchy, though it's one of the few things in your medieval wardrobe that gets washed with any regularity, usually in cold water with a bar of lye soap that smells like, well, suffering. The wool, on the other hand, never sees soap unless something truly catastrophic happens. And here's a fact that'll either make you laugh or squirm. Medieval folks didn't have a bedtime routine like we do. There were no toothbrushes, no skincare serums, no clean socks waiting on the end of the bed. Sleep just happened. You finished your day's work, extinguished the fire, and crawled under the covers in whatever you had on. In noble households, that might be a fine linen shirt or chemise. In peasant homes, it was often the same tunic you wore in the fields, and if you were especially tired, you might not even bother taking your belt off. There's a fringe theory floating around among medievalists that people even slept with their shoes on during the coldest parts of winter. Not your best silk slippers. Think thick leather boots stuffed with wool. Sounds absurd, right? But the alternative was waking up with frozen toes, and medieval people weren't stupid. They weren't obsessed with comfort, but they definitely weren't volunteering for frostbite. Tonight you try lying flat with your cloak wrapped around you like a burrito. It's adequate. The wool itches against your neck and you keep shifting to get comfortable, but at least it holds the heat. Eventually, you get clever and roll your linen shift a bit tighter around your legs, tucking the hem beneath your knees like a second layer of insulation. You wouldn't call it restful exactly, but you can see how a body could learn to live this way. Now, about that nightcap. Not the whiskey kind, unfortunately, the literal cloth hat. You spot one folded neatly on a stool beside the bed. It looks ridiculous, like something a cartoon elf would wear, long and floppy with a narrow brim. But trust me, you're going to want it. You slip it on, and immediately your ears thank you. The thing is, we lose a surprising amount of heat through our heads, and in a room with no insulation, that becomes a real problem. Enter the humble nightcap, equal parts fashion disaster and survival gear. Some versions even included ear flaps or long tails that could be wrapped around the neck like a built-in scarf. You tug yours down tighter, trying not to look in the small bronze mirror nearby because, honestly, the aesthetic is tragic, but it works. You feel instantly cozier, and for the first time you stop thinking about your nose turning into an icicle. There's a popular scholarly debate about how much medieval people actually change clothes at night. Some argue that noble women had designated night shifts, long linen gowns specifically for sleeping. Others say that's optimistic at best. Given the lack of laundry and the cost of fabric, it made more sense to sleep in layers you were already wearing. After all, every item of clothing was hand-sewn, valuable and time-consuming to maintain. You didn't casually toss your hose in the corner and grab a fresh pair. If you were lucky, you had 2 sets of clothes. Maybe. Still, your mind drifts back to all the paintings you've seen of medieval beds. People curled up in canopied nests surrounded by rich fabrics, soft pillows, and attendants waiting to tuck them in. But here, in the real deal, it's clear those images were a little generous. Or maybe just aspirational. Even for nobles, sleep was practical, not pampered. You did what you had to do to stay warm, and that usually meant never letting your body get fully exposed to the air. Here's a weird historical tidbit. In some parts of Europe, sleeping naked wasn't just impractical, it was sinful. Church teachings warned against temptations of the flesh, and sleeping without clothes was seen as inviting impure thoughts. Better to bundle up in layers, even if it meant waking up in a tangle of sweat and wool, than risk eternal damnation because your ankle got chilly and you thought about a cute squire. You shift under the covers again, rolling to your side and adjusting your nightcap. Your clothes bunch under you in weird places, and one of your woolen stockings has twisted around your calf. It's not ideal, but it's warm, and in this century that's what matters. You start to appreciate just how creative people had to get with basic survival. Every garment was a tool, linen for sweat, wool for warmth, furs for luxury, cloaks that doubled as blankets. No part of your wardrobe was just fashion. It was function, through and through. The fire has burned low again, but you're not shivering this time. Your body is its own little furnace now, sealed in cloth, breathing warm air behind thick bed curtains. You hear the wind outside, the faint rustle of the tapestry as it flutters slightly on the wall. Someone walks by your chamber door, their footsteps muffled by rugs, then silence. You close your eyes, the wool scratching your neck slightly, your nose poking out into the cold air. You can already feel that familiar ache creeping into your hip from the lumpy mattress. But at this point, you don't care. Your limbs are heavy, your face is warm, your ridiculous nightcap is doing its job, and honestly, you might actually be able to sleep in this century after all. Tonight, you've been demoted, gently but unmistakably. No more noble bedchamber, no velvet drapes, no fancy feather mattress lovingly warmed by a servant wielding a coal pan. Tonight, you're going down the winding spiral stairs, down past the main hall, down into the servants' quarters, which is less a quarters and more a stone cellar with ideas above its station. It's cold, damp and low-ceilinged, with wooden support beams that groan like a grumpy old man every time you so much as breathe near them. This is where the people who actually kept the castle running spent their nights. Cooks, maids, pages, stable hands. They weren't exactly getting turned-down service and a mint on the pillow. They were grateful to have a straw-filled pallet to collapse onto after 16 hours of grinding labour. You duck under a hanging row of drying laundry. Yes, Even servants had laundry days, and make your way to an empty spot in the corner. Empty, except for a bundle of cloth that smells faintly of onions and firewood. That's your bed for the night. Congrats. The mattress is a sack stuffed with straw, maybe some moss if you're lucky. The cloth is coarse, the kind that exfoliates your skin whether you like it or not. You settle in and realise quickly that the key to warmth down here isn't layers of fancy bedding, it's proximity. As in, sleeping close to other bodies. Really close. A young stable boy flops down a few feet from you. He gives you a polite nod and immediately pulls a ragged wool blanket over his head. On your other side, an older woman, probably the cook's assistant, mutters something under her breath and curls up with her knees to her chest, using her apron as a makeshift cover. A dog climbs onto the foot of your pallet uninvited and proceeds to make itself right at home. You think about protesting, but the truth is that dog is warm, and probably cleaner than the straw beneath you. Here's a basic historical fact. Sleeping communally wasn't just normal in the Middle Ages, it was practical. Body heat was the most reliable source of warmth, especially for those without fireplaces or thick stone walls. A peasant family might all sleep in one bed, crammed in with their children, grandparents, and occasionally a goat. Servants in castles had slightly more space, but the logic remained. If you're cold, find a warm body and scoot closer. And if you're wondering whether this led to awkwardness, the answer is, of course it did. But norms were different. Privacy was rare, especially for the lower classes. People were used to sharing space, hearing others snore, mutter, cry out in dreams. The concept of a bedroom as a private sacred space, that's a modern invention. Back here, beds are for sleep and survival, nothing more poetic than that. Now here's your quirky little fringe fact. In some medieval communities, it was considered lucky to sleep in a room where a newborn had recently rested. Why? Because babies were thought to be closer to the divine, and their recent presence supposedly left a lingering warmth, both physical and spiritual. So if you were particularly desperate or superstitious, you might swap sleeping spots with a cradle if the opportunity arose. Tonight, though, you're stuck with your scratchy straw and communal dog. As the night wears on, the temperature drops even further. The stone walls start to feel wet to the touch, and the single torch still burning in the corridor outside does absolutely nothing to help. Your breath puffs in front of your face in soft clouds, and you tighten your cloak around your shoulders. Across the room, someone coughs, and another voice groans in their sleep. It's not exactly peaceful, but it's a rhythm. The castle breathes its own version of sleep down here. You roll over and feel the crunch of straw beneath you. It shifts and pokes at awkward angles, like sleeping on a pile of crumpled potato chips. The dog shifts too, pressing against your calves. You're officially not alone, but in the best possible way. There's a strange comfort in it, this shared hardship, this quiet companionship of people who are too exhausted to care how close you are or what you smell like. Some scholars argue that this kind of sleeping arrangement helped build social bonds. Living and sleeping together created a constant awareness of one another, your habits, your moods, your health. It was hard to keep secrets. You knew who cried themselves to sleep, who ground their teeth, who whispered prayers in the dark. The medieval household, especially among servants, was as emotionally intertwined as it was physically close. Others suggest the opposite, that sleep was one of the few times people could disengage from the grueling social hierarchy. In the dark, beneath the same itchy wool, everyone was equally cold, equally tired, equally human. Whether that's comforting or not, you're not sure. But as the dog snores softly into your feet, and someone nearby mumbles a dream in a language you don't know, you do feel oddly safe. You close your eyes, the straw rustles as you shift your weight, and a few pieces sneak their way into your shirt collar. You'll be itchy for days, you'll smell like livestock, you'll probably end up with a rash, but you're warm, in a weird, inefficient way, not alone, not freezing, just one more body in the pile trying to sleep through the Middle Ages, and really, that's all anyone down here is doing. Not thriving, not relaxing, just surviving the night, together. You wake with straw in your mouth, a sore hip, and the very specific knowledge that someone, possibly the dog, possibly the stable boy, has stolen your blanket during the night. There's a vague, low-level ache in your spine and a puff of cold air that nips your nose the second you sit up. The servants' quarters are already stirring. Someone's stirring a pot of something thin and greyish over a fire that smells more like smoke than food. But you're not staying here tonight. You're moving up again, literally and metaphorically. Tonight you're sleeping in a chamber with tapestries. Real ones. Thick, dusty, magnificent, and entirely too heavy to be decorative. They line the stone walls like medieval wallpaper, covering nearly every inch of vertical space, and as soon as you step inside you understand why. The air here is not warm, let's not go that far, but definitely less biting than the rooms you've been shivering in. You reach out and press your hand to one of the walls, then to the tapestry over it. Stone. Freezing. Tapestry. Only kind of freezing. Progress. The chamber is modest but clearly reserved for someone important. Maybe a steward, a chaplain, or a lesser noble. The bed is narrow with no canopy this time, but the linens are well folded, and the fire in the hearth is active, crackling with small determined flames. But it's the walls that make the difference. The tapestry nearest the bed shows a hunting scene. Men on horseback with absurdly long lances chasing a wild boar through a forest that looks more like a tangled garden maze. Another one near the door depicts a scene from the Bible. Possibly Daniel in the lion's den, or someone yelling at goats. Medieval art is nothing if not interpretive. Here's your historical fact. In castles and manors, tapestries weren't just decorative, they were essential. Stone walls are terrible at retaining heat, and even worse at blocking drafts. Hang a few thick layers of embroidered wool or linen, and suddenly your room is a few degrees more survivable. Nobles who travelled often brought tapestries with them to furnish unfamiliar chambers. Think of it like a medieval moving-in kit. You've got your personal tapestries, your prayer book, and your favourite fur rug. Now your new guest room feels like home. And here's something even stranger. These wall hangings were not just insulation, but also insulation from sound. You know how castles echo like empty cathedrals? Tapestries helped absorb that, muffling conversations and softening footsteps. That's right. Your medieval ancestors invented the original soundproofing panels. Except theirs had unicorns and battle scenes embroidered on them. But it gets weirder. Some historians suggest that tapestries also acted as a kind of social cue. What you hung on your walls said something about your values, your lineage, your beliefs. Religious tapestries might remind guests and yourself of your piety. A hunting scene showed off wealth and leisure. A family crest embedded in gold thread screamed, "I'm important," and also, "I like gold." So while you're lying in bed tonight staring at an angel holding a sword while riding a deer, because sure, why not, you're also absorbing a little bit of your host's personal branding. Now, not all tapestries were massive or opulent. Some were more like heavy curtains, designed to cover doorways or windows. In fact, your bed tonight has one hanging directly behind it, acting like a kind of headboard. You press your hand against it again, it's warm to the touch, or rather, it's not cold, which in this time period is pretty much the same thing. There's some scholarly debate about how accessible tapestries were to the non-noble classes. Most agree that full-size wall hangings were expensive and reserved for castles, churches, or very wealthy households. But simpler versions, embroidered cloths, woven rugs, or even layered wool, were sometimes used by wealthier merchants or rural clergy. Some people even recycled old garments, sewing them together to hang across walls or windows to trap what little warmth they could. You snuggle into bed, the fire at your feet and a thick tapestry just behind your pillow. The mattress is firmer tonight, maybe fresh straw, or maybe someone finally took the time to retighten the ropes underneath. Either way, your back is slightly less offended than usual. The linens are cleanish, and there's a fur throw that smells faintly of sage, which is probably the closest thing to Febreze this era has to offer. A quirky fact for your night. In some parts of Europe, tapestries were rumoured to carry the voices of past conversations. Not literally, of course, but metaphorically. People whispered secrets in chambers where heavy tapestries hung, believing that the cloth could remember words. That's how deeply people respected fabric. It wasn't just insulation, it was witness. As the fire dims and the room settles into its quiet, tapestry-dampened hush, you feel something strange. Calm. The kind of calm that doesn't come from silence, but from stillness. From a room designed not just for sleeping, but for being slightly less miserable in winter. The flickering light from the hearth dances across the embroidered forms on the walls, moving shadows over stitched faces, frozen mid-battle, mid-prayer, mid-boar hunt. You let your eyes follow the lines of thread. The colours faded but still visible. You think about the hands that stitched them, usually not the nobles who owned them, but skilled artisans, mostly women, sometimes entire guilds. Each piece took months, sometimes years. A tapestry wasn't just decoration. It was labour, history, survival, and, most importantly for you right now, protection against another sleepless, freezing night. You shift in bed, pulling the fur tighter around your shoulders. The draught from the door tries to creep in, but the hanging fabric dulls its bite. The fire is dying slowly, but the warmth lingers in the stone of the hearth and the layer of trapped air around your bed. It's not a perfect system, but it's better, it's smarter, and as your eyes start to close, you realise this might be the first time you're falling asleep without shivering. Tonight, you get brave. You've had your fill of four-poster beds and tapestry-insulated chambers, and you're ready to try the most obvious, yet most problematic medieval heating solution: fire. Not the cosy, crackling hearth kind with a dog curled up beside it and a goblet of something mulled. No, you're going full medieval realist. An open fire lit in the corner of a room with almost no ventilation. Basically, the medieval version of do I want to freeze or suffocate? You pick suffocation, apparently. Bold move. The chamber you're sleeping in tonight is spare. Bare stone walls, no canopy, and only one half-hearted rush mat spread out near the centre of the floor. It smells like damp stone, wood smoke, and something vaguely acidic that you don't investigate too closely. A low fire has already been lit in the room's primitive hearth, just a stone-lined nook in the floor. No chimney, no flue, just fire, inside, with you. You approach it cautiously, hands outstretched. The warmth is immediate, almost jarringly pleasant. For the first time in a while, your fingers don't feel like they're going to break off. But the smoke, oh, the smoke. It's already beginning to curl upward, hovering like a ghost near the ceiling, then drifting back down as if unsure of its next move. Your eyes start to sting before you've even laid down. Here's the historical truth bomb of the night. Before chimneys became widespread in the late medieval period, many fires in castles, manor houses and peasant homes were open and central. The smoke either exited through a hole in the roof or just kind of lingered. Some homes had smoke bays, specially designed areas where smoke could gather and eventually find its way out. But in most cases, it was just part of the experience. Breathing, optional. Warmth, essential. You lie down on a low straw mattress near the fire. It's warm, gloriously warm, especially compared to every other miserable, teeth-chattering night you've endured. Your back isn't thrilled with the uneven ground, but your toes are actually thawed out for once, so you take the win. You pull your wool blanket tight and let the fire's heat seep into your bones. It's nice, for about 5 minutes. Then, the smoke changes direction. It starts sneaking toward you like a slow, malicious fog. Your nose wrinkles, your eyes water. The room feels smaller. The warmth you are enjoying starts to morph into discomfort as your lungs argue with your survival instinct. Breathing becomes a conscious task, like chewing or blinking. Not ideal for sleep. And here's the fringe fact. In many medieval households, people believed that smoke had protective properties. It kept away evil spirits, pests, and even disease. Some thought that inhaling small amounts of smoke could actually strengthen the body, like a rustic immune booster. Of course, now we know it just wrecks your lungs, but hey, at least they were trying. Some scholars believe people may have deliberately tolerated a certain level of smoke at night, especially in winter, just to avoid freezing. Others argue that homes were built to be leakier than we realise, enough draft to suck the smoke out without obvious chimneys. But based on the way your eyes are watering right now, let's just say medieval ventilation left something to be desired. You try adjusting your position, turning your face away from the worst of it. Better, but not much. The fire pops, and you flinch. Sparks dance briefly before settling into the ashes. The warmth is real, but it comes at a cost. You're starting to sweat under your cloak, and that's a problem because it's the kind of sweat that cools you down too much once you step away from the heat. The trick is to stay warm without overdoing it, to balance the fire's glow with your body's insulation. Too hot and you wake up cold and damp. Too cold and you never sleep at all. Somewhere outside a bell tolls. Midnight maybe later. Time loses shape in the dark. The fire dims a little, but its glow still pulses gently against the stone walls. You look up and notice that the smoke has begun to cling to the rafters, painting them black. Generations of fires have left their mark, turning wood into charcoal, stone into soot. You're breathing history, whether you like it or not. There's another strange little tradition worth noting. In some households, people placed herbs or aromatic woods on the fire at night, not just to mask the smoke, but for symbolic protection. Juniper, sage, even dried rosemary, all burned with intention. Some believed the smoke from these herbs could carry prayers upward or purify the air. Tonight's fire has no such herbs, just damp wood and regret. You roll over, burying your face in the crook of your arm to block the smoke. Your eyes sting, your throat feels like sandpaper, but you're not cold. That has to count for something. And now, as your body begins to settle, lulled by the warmth and muted crackling, you actually feel drowsy. The fire's rhythm becomes a kind of lullaby, if you ignore the part where it's slowly turning your lungs into medieval brisket. You can see why people tolerated this. Warmth is addictive. After nights of freezing, aching and huddling under furs, the fire feels like salvation. A smoky, borderline toxic salvation. But still, better the devil you can breathe around than the one that turns your toes black. You drift off eventually, coughing once then twice, but your body relaxes. The straw pokes, the smoke stings, but the warmth wraps around you like a protective spell. You're not in comfort exactly, you're in compromise, and here in the Middle Ages that's close enough. You survive the fire room, barely. Your lungs feel like you've smoked a pack of chimney bricks, your eyes are still a little pink, and your cloak smells like medieval barbecue. But you weren't cold. You might have coughed yourself into unconsciousness, but you slept, and that's more than you can say for some of your nights here. Tonight, though, you're getting to try something smarter, safer, and weirdly modern sounding. It's the medieval equivalent of a heated mattress pad, except it involves no electricity, lots of heavy lifting, and red-hot rocks. That's right, you're sleeping with hot stones. You're led to a modest chamber tucked near the castle's kitchen. An intentional placement, because the proximity to warmth is key. The air smells of roasted onions and firewood, which honestly is a step up from the usual wet dog meets damp socks scent you've grown accustomed to. A maid sets down a thick linen bundle on the bed, then disappears. Inside it are bricks, rectangular chunks of clay or stone wrapped in cloth and still warm from the hearth. They radiate heat like miniature suns, and for the first time you feel excitement. Yes, excitement. Over warm rocks. That's where you are now. Here's the basic idea. You heat flat stones or bricks in a fire, usually in the hearth or the coals of a kitchen oven, then wrap them in cloth to prevent burns and place them under your sheets before bed. The result? A toasty sleeping surface that lasts just long enough to lull you into sleep before your body heat takes over. It's simple, effective, and, miraculously, doesn't involve slowly asphyxiating yourself. The maid returns with a metal object that looks vaguely like a frying pan with a lid. She calls it a bed warmer and places a few coals inside, then slides it back and forth under the sheets, heating the linens directly. You watch the steam rise from the damp fabric as she works. It's hypnotic. You start to understand why nobles considered this kind of prep part of their bedtime ritual. The maid, unfazed, moves with practiced rhythm and zero interest in your awe. This is just another Tuesday for her. For you, it's the medieval Ritz. Here's your historical fact. The use of hot stones or coals to warm beds dates back centuries, and became especially common during the colder months of what historians now call the Little Ice Age, roughly from the 14th to the 19th century. Castles, especially those in northern Europe, could become absolutely brutal in winter. Fireplaces weren't always practical in every room, so hot stones were a portable, personal solution. Now for the fringe detail, some people believe these warm stones could also draw out illness. There are records of people placing hot bricks not just in beds, but against sore stomachs or aching joints, like medieval heating pads. Others feared that hot coals could invite evil spirits if left unattended, or worse, explode from hidden moisture inside the brick. You decide not to think too hard about that last part. The maid finishes her sweep and disappears with the coal pan, leaving you alone with your stone-warmed mattress and a sense of profound, almost spiritual anticipation. You slide under the covers and instantly feel it. The warmth, deep and steady, like lying in the sun after a cold swim. It seeps into your muscles, banishes the ache in your lower back, and makes you sigh with real, actual relief. Not the kind where you're just not freezing. The kind where you might fall asleep smiling. Your feet press against the cloth-wrapped bricks. They're not scalding, but they're definitely toasty. You shift a little to better line up your spine with one, and the sensation is so blissful you momentarily forget you're lying on the straw and surrounded by stone walls that whisper about drafty death. For now you're warm, perfectly warm, and you didn't have to share a blanket with livestock or cough your way into sleep. There's an ongoing academic debate about how widespread this practice was. Some historians argue that only wealthier households had the time, tools, and servants to make bed warming a regular routine. Others suggest that hot bricks were common among working-class families with access to a hearth, especially in colder regions. Either way, the concept is simple enough that variations of it existed across cultures, from heated stones in Japanese futons to clay pots filled with embers in rural Italian cottages. Cold is a universal enemy. Warm rocks are the universal answer. You pull your blanket tighter, sinking further into the warmth. The bed curtains tonight are simple. Just a heavy wool drape on the window and a thinner cloth strung around the frame of your sleeping space. But they help. The warmth builds. You feel like you're in a cocoon, not just of fabric, but of clever medieval engineering. Some people believe comfort is a modern invention, but you're starting to see it differently. Comfort in the Middle Ages just looked different. It was heavier, scratchier, smokier, and involved more manual labour, but it was real. They figured things out, they had to. Because winter didn't care about your rank or your prayers, or whether your furs matched your shoes. If you didn't prepare, you froze. You close your eyes, your body begins to slacken, muscles loosening one by one. Your feet are warm, your core is toasty, and your nose, well, your nose is still kind of cold, but nothing's perfect. You'll take 90% comfort and call it a win. The fire in the kitchen below is still burning. You can hear the faint clang of iron and the distant murmur of someone preparing tomorrow's breakfast. Somewhere down the corridor, a guard sneezes, but none of it touches you here, in your tiny heated corner of this stone fortress. You think, briefly, of how many winters people survived this way. Quiet nights, warm bricks, scratchy blankets, and the steady hiss of steam rising from damp linen. Not fancy, not luxurious, but effective. And tonight, as you drift off with a warm rock at your feet and a grateful heart in your chest, it feels like the most human thing in the world. Tonight, you're not just getting into bed, you're stepping into one. Literally. The moment you slide between the woolen sheets, you pull a thick curtain closed around the mattress, sealing yourself inside a box of warmth and darkness. This is the medieval curtained bed in all its glory, and suddenly, you're not in a cold castle chamber anymore. You're in a womb of woven fabric, protected from drafts, snooping servants, flickering candlelight, and, most importantly, the kind of bone-deep cold that sneaks in like guilt. The moment the curtain closes, the air changes. It's still, heavy, almost humid from your own breath. Your ears adjust first. Outside, you can hear muffled sounds, the pop of a hearth fire, footsteps on the stone floor, the soft clink of metal as someone arranges armour nearby. But inside the bed, silence. Blessed. Wool-draped silence. The bed itself is massive, larger than any modern queen-sized mattress. It's built from thick oak, its legs carved like twisted vines, or perhaps a family crest if your host has a flair for branding. The mattress is stuffed with feathers this time, probably goose, and it breathes better than the straw and hay combination from earlier nights. It sighs under your weight, compressing just enough to cradle your frame without threatening to swallow you whole. You roll to your side and press your hand against the curtain. It's thick, 2 layers at least, wool on the outside, linen or damask on the inside. There's even a little leather strap to tie it shut. This isn't decoration. This is medieval survival tech. These curtains create a microclimate, a climate where you, wrapped in 2 tunics and a linen shirt, can sleep without your breath freezing into icicles. Here's your historical fact of the night. Curtained beds became popular in the late medieval period not just for warmth, but for privacy. In noble households, even private bedchambers weren't truly private. Servants came and went, children might sleep on the floor, a physician could be summoned at any hour. The curtained bed became your final line of defence. Pull the drapes, and you created a personal world. Whether you were trying to sleep, cry, plot, or just escape for a moment, this was your sanctum. Of course, there's always a strange side note, and here's tonight's. Some people believed curtained beds trapped illness. That's right. All that heat and breath and bodily stuff, sealed in by heavy fabric, could allegedly ferment into bad air. Miasma, they called it. Scholars now mostly roll their eyes at the idea, but it's true that if you sealed off a space too tightly, you ran the risk of poor ventilation. Especially if you had to share your curtained bed with someone coughing up whatever passed for the flu in 1347. Speaking of sharing, curtained beds were often communal. Married couples, obviously, but sometimes travelling nobles bunked together to conserve heat. Sometimes even a servant would be invited or ordered to climb in, not for pleasure, but for warmth. You can almost imagine it. Two awkward people lying stiffly on opposite sides of the mattress, trying not to breathe too loud, both grateful not to be freezing, and also silently praying for morning. Tonight you have the bed to yourself, a rare luxury. You tuck the blanket around your legs and shift deeper into the centre. The curtain brushes against your nose and you catch the faint scent of old wax and lavender. It's not fresh, it's been reused for decades probably, but it's oddly soothing, like the lingering warmth of someone who's already fallen asleep and left the bed warmed up just for you. There's some scholarly debate about whether these beds were ever truly comfortable. Many surviving examples, now kept in museums, are massive, stiff, and intimidatingly formal. But others suggest that with enough bedding, enough heat, and the right layering of fabric, they could be deeply restful, what we'd call cosy. It's hard to say for sure, since most people who wrote about them were either praising the extravagance or complaining about their back pain. You shift onto your back and let the warmth build. The feather mattress, the wool blankets, your 3 layers of clothing, and the sealed curtain all work together like a conspiracy of comfort. No wind, no cold spots. Just you, your thoughts, and the flickering firelight outside trying and failing to creep in. This moment, right now, is something that medieval people craved. They worked long, brutal days. They lived with the constant risk of war, famine, and illness. They were surrounded by noise and chaos and the pressure of a world that could crush you for being born on the wrong plot of land. But this, bedtime, under the curtain, was yours. A daily ritual of restoration. Your best chance at peace. You run your fingers along the embroidered edge of the curtain. It's simple, just a looped design, maybe a family pattern or a symbol of protection. Some believed that stitching certain patterns into bed curtains could ward off bad dreams. You can't decide if that's superstition or genius. Either way, tonight you'll take your chances. Eventually your eyes begin to close. The air inside the curtain is warmer now, your body heat has done its job, your breath no longer fogs, your muscles, unused to softness, begin to release their tension. You feel the heaviness of sleep creeping in from the edges like a tide, a slow, wool-wrapped tide. And here's the best part. You don't hear the rats, you don't hear the wind. You don't even hear the creaking wood or the whimper of a servant's nightmare. You're in your own world now. You've pulled the curtain closed against the dark, and for the first time in days, maybe weeks, you feel something dangerously close to comfort. You shift once more, sighing as your head sinks into a slightly lumpy pillow. Outside the curtain, the medieval world continues. Loud, cold, unpredictable. But in here, it's just you. Warm, still, hidden. A tiny miracle stitched together with cloth, feathers, and a deep human need for shelter in the night. By now you've probably accepted that medieval sleep wasn't about comfort so much as strategic layering, teamwork, and dumb luck. But tonight, you're adding one final piece to your period-correct bedtime outfit. A piece that looks hilariously out of place, but turns out to be as practical as it gets. It's your nightcap. And not the fun kind. No ale, no whiskey, no cheers, my lord moment. This is a literal hat for sleeping, and while it may look like something a cartoon gnome would wear while making cookies in a tree, it's about to become your new best friend. Let's take a moment and appreciate what you're dealing with. You're sleeping in a cold stone castle, where the inside temperature isn't much different from the outside. Sometimes colder, in fact, thanks to damp stones sucking the warmth right out of your bones. You've got your woolen hose, your linen shirt, your scratchy cloak, and your many-layered bedding fortress. But no matter what you do, your head is always exposed, your ears ache, your scalp gets cold, and by morning you've got that ice-numb feeling that makes it hurt just to blink. Enter the medieval nightcap. It's simple, really. Usually made from linen, wool, or a blend of the two, it's designed to hug your head, cover your ears, and sometimes even tie under your chin like a bonnet. There are no pom-poms, no novelty reindeer patterns. Just straightforward, body heat trapping genius. You pull yours on, and immediately you feel the difference. Your ears stop hurting, your forehead relaxes, and you realise why every illustrated monk, old man and sickly noble in every medieval manuscript seems to be wearing one, even in bed. Here's your historical fact of the night. Nightcaps were standard issue for men and women in colder regions of medieval Europe. For women, it was often just a continuation of the head coverings they wore during the day. For men, it could be as simple as a snug woolen coif, or as elaborate as a quilted padded cap that looked more like battle gear than sleepwear. They weren't just for cold nights either. Some people wore lighter versions year-round to keep hair clean and discourage lice. Charming, right? You lie back against your not-quite-a-pillow and pull the cap snug over your ears. Your breath puffs gently into the darkness. It's quiet tonight. The wind isn't as fierce, and the fire in your chamber burns low but steady. The bed curtains are pulled closed again, and between the layers of cloth, the hot stone tucked near your feet, and your brand new bedtime hat, you feel, well, not warm exactly, but evenly not cold, and that's enough. Now, the fringe fact. In certain regions, particularly in northern France and the Low Countries, there were rumours that not wearing a nightcap could give you nightmares. That's right. Bareheaded sleeping was considered not just foolish, but spiritually risky. The belief was that uncovered heads allowed bad vapours, or even demons to enter through the scalp. Apparently, even evil spirits hate wool. Who knew? You roll onto your side and feel the soft pressure of the cap against your cheek. It's comforting in the way that only deeply practical things can be. You realise, after a while, that it also muffles sound just a bit, like a very low-tech noise-cancelling headset. The creak of the rafters seems more distant. The random nighttime sounds of castle life, snoring, doors scraping, someone moving through the hallway with a candle, fade into the background. There's a debate among historians about how much people truly valued warmth versus how much they simply tolerated cold. Some argue that medieval people were just tougher, that they built up a tolerance we can't imagine today. Others point out the extreme lengths they went to: layered beds, bed curtains, nightcaps, fur linings, heated stones, to create warmth wherever they could. You're firmly in the second camp. Anyone who sews a fitted sleeping hat out of scratchy wool is not playing the I'm used to it game. They're cold, they're desperate, and they're doing their best. Tonight, your nightcap joins the long, slightly ridiculous list of things that shouldn't make you feel better, but somehow do. You start to wonder about the other people sleeping in this castle. The lord and lady in their towering featherbed, the cook passed out on a pile of straw behind the kitchen hearth, the servants curled on pallets with dogs at their feet. How many of them are wearing hats? How many heads are tucked under wool and linen tonight, dreaming of spring? You start to drift. The heat from the stone at your feet has cooled, but the warmth it brought lingers. Your layers are settled, your position just uncomfortable enough to remind you that yes, you're still in the past, but it's bearable. And the cap, it does something else too. It holds you in place, keeps you centred, like a gentle, itchy hand on your head saying, "You'll be fine, sleep." Your thoughts drift. You imagine a medieval tailor stitching one of these caps by candlelight, muttering about thread counts and head sizes. You picture a child tugging one down too far and walking into a beam. You see an elderly monk falling asleep at his desk, parchment still in hand, cap slipping sideways over one eye. And all of them, in some way, sharing this exact moment with you. Cold air, heavy blankets, that deep inhale when you finally settle in and know you might actually sleep. Your breathing slows. The weight of the bed covers presses gently against your chest. Your limbs go heavy. The nightcap hugs your ears, cradles your forehead, and shields you from the slightest chill in the air. It doesn't look like much, but tonight, it's your crown, not of gold, not of jewels, but of warmth, and honestly, that might be better. Tonight you're climbing the stairs, not just one or two. We're talking spiral staircase levels of commitment, the kind that makes your knees crack and your lungs politely protest. Up and up past the warm heart of the castle where the kitchens live, past the Lord's Solar with its well-tended fire, up through colder, darker corridors until you reach the topmost tower chamber. The kind of place where you expect to find a princess locked up or a scholar driven slightly mad by wind and solitude. But no, tonight it's just you. And the cold. This room is what you might generously call austere. There's a bed frame in the corner, yes, and a small hearth that looks like it hasn't hosted a flame since the last century. One tiny window, more slit than opening, offers a view of the surrounding countryside, and also delivers an endless, icy draught. You set your pack down and the sound echoes like a gunshot. It's quiet up here, bone quiet. You can actually hear the wind whistle through cracks in the stone. You shiver before you even take off your cloak. Why does this room even exist? Well, in medieval castles, upper chambers were often used for guests, lesser nobles, or sometimes for members of the household who needed privacy, or isolation. Higher up meant safer in theory, harder to attack, easier to defend, but also significantly colder. Heat rises, yes, but not through feet of cold stone and drafty stairwells, so tonight you're sleeping in the medieval equivalent of an icebox. You assess your situation. The bed's not much. Rope-laced frame, lumpy mattress, no canopy, and no visible sign that anyone's bothered to warm it in days. You sit down anyway. The straw pokes through the linen cover like little knives of disapproval. You unpack your bedding, wool blanket, fur throw, and yes, your now beloved nightcap. You're going to need all of it. Here's your historical fact for the evening. Tower bedrooms were often used as guest rooms or even makeshift prison cells. They provided security and solitude, but also came with serious temperature trade-offs. Some towers had built-in fireplaces, but many didn't, and even those that did struggled to retain heat due to the wind exposure and poor insulation. Rooms like this were for short stays, or for people who had no choice. You huddle near the fireplace anyway, placing a few pathetic sticks inside and striking a flint in hope more than expectation. Eventually you coax a tiny fire to life, the kind that gives off more emotional support than actual warmth. You crouch beside it, palms out, pretending it helps. Then you spot something tucked under the bed, a stone wrapped in scorched linen. You grin. Someone else had the same idea. You drag it over, place it near the fire, and hope to resurrect some heat before bed. Fringe fact time. In certain parts of Europe, tower rooms were associated with spiritual retreat. Monks, anchorites, and even noblewomen in mourning were occasionally housed in such chambers, using the isolation and the cold as part of their penance. Freezing in solitude was seen as virtuous suffering. You, however, are not feeling particularly holy about it. As night falls, the air grows sharper, heavier. Your breath clouds in front of you like a fog machine at a haunted house. You layer up. 2 tunics, hose, socks, gloves with the fingertips cut off, cloak and hat. You wrap the hot stone, now slightly warm, which counts as a success, in an extra shirt and slip it under your blanket near your feet. You lie down. The mattress groans like it resents your presence. The linen smells faintly of ash and dust. You pull the covers up to your chin and tuck the edges around you like a cocoon. There are no curtains on this bed. Nothing to trap heat or block out the shadows on the wall. Just you, your breath, and the rising wind beyond the window slit. It whistles like a warning, and the room creaks in response. You close your eyes and hope this place doesn't literally collapse on you. There's scholarly debate over whether people truly slept in tower rooms, or if they were more symbolic spaces, used briefly, ceremonially, or as temporary retreats. Some evidence suggests that during times of conflict, nobles would move their most precious possessions, and occasionally themselves, into the highest rooms. Others think they were used only in summer, when the elevation helped with airflow. Based on your current experience, you're voting for absolutely not in winter. Still, you can see the appeal in theory. It's peaceful up here, detached. The noises of the castle don't reach this far. No kitchen clatter, no dogs barking, no hallway arguments over who forgot to stoke the fire. Just wind, and stone, and your own heartbeat. If you weren't freezing to death, it might even be meditative. Your toes, pressed against the hot stone, are the only part of you that feels remotely warm. You consider rotating positions throughout the night like a chicken on a spit, but even moving feels like a betrayal of the tiny heat pocket you've created. So you stay still. You breathe slowly. You wait. You start to doze. Not because you're comfortable, but because your body gives up. Fatigue wins. Your mind floats somewhere between sleep and the awareness of your own cold breath. You dream of nothing and everything. Of warm baths. Of thick socks. Of fireplaces the size of rooms. When you wake briefly, it's pitch black. The fire is dead. The stone at your feet has cooled. But you're still here, still breathing, still wrapped tight and determined not to move. That might be the real secret to sleeping in a tower room. Don't fight the cold, just accept it. Let it settle over you like snow and find your peace in stillness. You don't wake so much as regain consciousness, slowly, grudgingly, as if your body has spent the night protesting your life choices and now reluctantly agrees to let you move again. The tower chamber is somehow colder than it was when you fell asleep. Your breath fogs the air. Your nose feels like it's been carved from ice. Your knees ache from sleeping, curled up like a frightened woodland creature. And your first thought isn't about breakfast. It's about where exactly you're supposed to pee in a castle, where leaving the bed means practically courting frostbite. Congratulations, you've officially reached the most underrated misery of medieval winter life. Midnight bathroom logistics. You sit up slowly, the covers sliding off your shoulders like a betrayal. The stone floor glares at you from beneath the bed. You don't dare put your feet on it without wrapping them first. There's no carpet here, no slippers, no heated floor tiles humming gently under your toes. Just centuries of bitter stone radiating the memory of every winter since the Norman conquest. You fumble for the chamber pot tucked just under the bed. It's ceramic, wide-mouthed and uncomfortably intimate. This humble pot is a medieval necessity, a loyal, if gross, companion. Castles weren't designed with indoor plumbing in mind, and the idea of walking across a dark, icy corridor or down a spiral staircase just to relieve yourself was not only inconvenient, it was dangerous. One wrong step and you'd be tumbling down into the courtyard like a particularly embarrassed sack of turnips. Here's your historical fact of the night. Chamber pots were a standard feature in most sleeping quarters, regardless of rank. They came in ceramic, metal, or even wood, depending on what you could afford. In noble rooms, they might be tucked into fine wooden cabinets called close stools, basically early decorative porta potties. In servants' quarters, they were just kind of there, out in the open. Everyone knew what they were. No one wanted to talk about them. You grip the pot with gloved hands, shivering as you do what has to be done. It's not glamorous. It's not even particularly accurate. But it beats wandering into the dark in your nightshirt with your dignity flapping in the wind. You wipe your hands on a ragged bit of cloth and slide the pot back under the bed, silently promising to pretend none of this happened. And now we arrive at the real issue. What to do with it after? Because you can't just leave it there. Not for long. In some castles, especially larger ones, there were designated privy chambers, stone recesses that opened out over moats or cesspits. You could pour your chamber pot into one of these and pray to all the saints that no one was walking below at the time. In other places, you'd hand it off to a servant. But guess what? If you are the servant, you're walking it outside yourself. Fringe fact. Some medieval chamber pots had personal touches, engraved initials, heraldic symbols, even little painted messages on the inside just in case your humiliation wasn't complete enough. There are records of pots with phrases like, "Remember me," or "This too shall pass," glazed onto their interiors. Humour, a lifeline through the frost. You make your way cautiously across the freezing floor toward the nearest arrow slit, the closest thing this tower has to a window. It's too narrow to do anything useful, but it lets in a sliver of light and a lot of wind. You glance out. Snow has begun to fall. The sky's grey, the courtyard below almost empty, and the thought of tromping all the way to the garderobe, the castle's primitive toilet room, is laughable at best. You're not going anywhere. There's some academic debate about how often chamber pots were cleaned and emptied, and by whom. Servants clearly did the bulk of the dirty work, but in smaller households everyone pitched in. Hygiene standards were different, but not non-existent. People understood the importance of disposing of waste, if only because it started to smell immediately. Castles were drafty, sure, but they still trapped odours in the wrong circumstances. So yes, things were washed. Not frequently, not perfectly, but enough to survive. You return to your bed with great ceremony, tucking your legs under the blanket like a hostage negotiating terms. The hot stone from earlier is now just a cool weight. You don't care. You're done moving. You're not touching the floor again until daylight. You pull the covers up, adjust your nightcap, and resume your position like a medieval corpse awaiting resurrection. It's at this moment that you appreciate just how much of medieval life revolved around effort. Everything was work. Warming the bed, lighting the fire, preparing a meal, going to the bathroom. It was all exhausting all the time. You couldn't afford to be lazy, not because of moral virtue, but because laziness might get you killed, or frostbitten, or, worst of all, cold and damp. Still, despite the midnight indignities, you start to drift off again. There's a strange calm in knowing there are no expectations of you tonight. You've done what needed to be done. You've survived another castle evening without tripping over your own cloak in the dark or accidentally pouring a chamber pot out the wrong window. You hear the wind again, tugging at the narrow window slit like it wants to come in and complain about the living conditions. The walls groan, the mattress creaks under your weight, and your body begins to relax once more. You pull your cap down over your ears. The pot waits silently under your bed, like a disgraced roommate. But for now, you don't think about it. You think about warmth, about stillness, and about how, even in a castle built for battle, survival often came down to something as simple and absurd as not freezing your butt off while peeing at 2 a.m. By now, you've learned that sleeping in a medieval castle is less about rest and more about surviving until morning in one piece, and with most of your toes. But tonight, things are shifting a little. Not warmer, necessarily, and definitely not more comfortable, but stranger, quieter. You're still in that stone fortress, still wrapped in wool and linen, still battling drafts like they're personal enemies, but now it's the sounds, the textures, and the weird feeling of night that's taking over. You're not just lying in a cold bed, you're being swallowed by the medieval dark. The fire has burned out. It didn't go with a dramatic puff of smoke, just a slow surrender, a dying glow buried under ash. You can't see much anymore, even with your eyes adjusted. The last candle sputters in the corner, its flame fighting the draughts like a stubborn drunk refusing to leave the tavern. You watch it flicker once, twice, then it's gone. You're left in near total darkness, and suddenly your ears are working overtime. It starts with creaking wood. The ceiling beams above you stretch and groan like something ancient is pacing back and forth in the rafters. It's just the cold, of course, or so you tell yourself. The castle is settling, the stone cooling, the structure shrinking slightly as the temperature drops. Totally normal, nothing to be afraid of. Just the entire building making sounds like it's alive and mildly annoyed with your presence. Then come the crickets. Yes, crickets. In a castle. Not what you were expecting, but they're here. Somewhere in the floor rushes or hidden behind the hearth. A soft rhythmic chirping that almost sounds mechanical. It blends with the occasional rustle of straw and fabric as the castle's sleepers shift in their beds. It's oddly soothing, in that I'm not completely alone kind of way. Until something much less soothing comes next. Footsteps. Faint ones. Somewhere in the hallway beyond your door. Not urgent, not hurried, just slow, deliberate, and definitely human. You hold your breath, every hair on your arm standing straight up. Could be a guard, could be another servant heading to the kitchen for embers or water. Could also be, well, let's just say castles have reputations, and you're very aware you're sleeping in one with a few too many centuries of history and a few too few lights. Here's your historical fact. Nighttime in medieval castles wasn't just physically dark, it was spiritually loaded. People believed the hours between midnight and dawn were when spirits walked, when dreams carried messages, when the veil between the living and the dead was thinner than usual. Night wasn't just night, it was a time of mystery, superstition, and vulnerability. Which feels about right when you're lying in a dark, echoing room trying not to breathe too loudly in case a ghost gets curious. You pull the covers up to your chin and try to ground yourself in the reality of the moment. It's cold, your feet are freezing, your cloak is bunched under your shoulder, your nose is numb. These are real things. You're alive. You're in a bed. That scraping sound from the wall is probably just a mouse, a very energetic, possibly armor-wearing mouse. Then come the smells. With the fire out and no new smoke to mask the world, everything else floats in. The the scent of damp stone, old wool, wood smoke clinging to fabric. But also something a little sour, a little earthy. Someone in a nearby chamber is sick and their night has not been kind. Somewhere else a chamber pot needs attention. You try not to imagine which one. The night doesn't just echo, it lingers. Fringe fact for tonight. Medieval people often feared breathing night air. The belief was that the darkness itself made air dangerous, especially in cities and castle keeps. They thought that in the absence of sunlight, the air became heavy with illness and bad humours. It's one reason why so many slept with bed curtains closed tight and herbs tied to the rafters. Lavender, sage, and rosemary weren't just for smell. They were defence mechanisms, olfactory armour. You breathe shallowly and try not to focus on the background stink of unwashed humanity. Instead, you listen. The footsteps are gone. The crickets continue. Somewhere below, a dog barks once, then falls silent. The wind picks up through the arrow slits, blowing over the opening with a low, almost musical moan. If you hadn't lived through the rest of this week, you might call it beautiful. Right now, it's just creepy. But eventually, even in all this weirdness, your body starts to relax. That's the surprising part. You've heard enough sounds now that your brain decides most of them are familiar, harmless. The wood creaks like it did last night. The wind moans like it always does. Even the ghost footsteps seem to have lost interest in you. You shift under your blanket and close your eyes. The darkness isn't frightening now. It's a shield. No obligations, no movement, no expectations. Just quiet. You start to feel a rhythm, your breath, the creaks, the crickets. A medieval lullaby of sorts. Deep under the castle, the kitchen fire might still be glowing, and the guards may be rotating watch. But here, in your little pocket of stone and wool and silence, time seems to stop. Scholars debate how much medieval people feared the night versus how much they simply adapted to it. Some say the fear of spirits and night demons was deeply ingrained and shaped entire evening routines. Others argue that most people were too exhausted to worry about what might be floating around in the dark. Either way, the night was a different world, one with its own rules. You drift off, finally, surrounded by smells, creaks, and the faintest sound of wind over stone. The castle holds its breath. You do the same, and against all odds, sleep finds you. Tonight, something strange happens. You wake up in the middle of the night, eyes open, mind alert but not panicked, not cold, just awake. It's dark still and deeply quiet except for the occasional sigh of wind or the shuffle of something small in the rushes. The fire's long gone out, your body is wrapped in warmth, and your limbs are comfortably heavy. But you're not tired anymore, you're just awake. And oddly, that seems normal. Like this is exactly what your body was supposed to do. Welcome to one of the most overlooked truths of medieval life. Segmented sleep. Or as some historians call it, first sleep and second sleep. You've just completed your first shift, and now, in the early hours before dawn, you're entering the liminal space between sleeps. A time for reflection, prayer, conversation, even a snack if you're lucky. Night, it turns out, wasn't always meant to be one long block of unconsciousness. You sit up slowly, your blanket falling around your waist in a cosy heap. The room is cloaked in soft shadow, but your eyes have adjusted to the low light. You can make out the outlines of the bed frame, the small wooden table in the corner, the slight glint of metal where your chamber pot rests, still unemptied, you monster. The air is cold on your skin, but not unbearable. You wrap your cloak around your shoulders and settle back, not quite ready to sleep again, but not uncomfortable either. Here's your historical fact. Segmented sleep was normal for much of human history, especially before artificial lighting became a thing. People would sleep for 4 or 5 hours, wake for an hour or two, then go back to sleep until dawn. This wasn't insomnia, it was just how sleep worked in a world where darkness lasted 12 to 14 hours and there wasn't much else to do. In this in-between time, this midnight interlude, people might pray, meditate, tend the fire, or even visit neighbours. Yes, visit. Imagine someone knocking on your door at 2 a.m. just to chat about livestock. In some households, couples used this time for intimacy. In others, it was a solitary ritual of silence. Monks used it for matins, the night prayers. their days structured entirely around the rhythm of light and dark. You're getting a taste of that rhythm now. You look out the small slit of a window across the room. The sky beyond is ink black, pin-pricked with stars. No city glow, no hum of streetlights, just the long, untouched dark stretching endlessly above the countryside. It's both comforting and eerie. The kind of dark that makes you feel very small and very aware that you're sharing space with hundreds of years of silence. You rub your eyes and sit cross-legged beneath the covers. This moment, strange as it is, feels deeply yours. No one is calling for you. No chores, no footsteps. Just you and the hush of a castle sleeping. You imagine the other chambers, some still snoring, others maybe just like you, awake, quiet, thinking. Fringe fact. There's evidence that some people use this time to write. Monks, certainly. But also literate nobles and clergy who found that inspiration struck during the midnight pause. A few medieval manuscripts even contain marginal notes like, written during my second waking, or composed between sleeps. Not a bad time for poetry, honestly. You stretch your legs and wiggle your toes beneath the blanket. The hot stone from earlier has cooled entirely, now just a heavy lump. But you've stored up enough heat for it not to matter. You pick up your hooded cloak and wrap it around your shoulders, adding a bit more insulation against the slow creep of chill returning to the room. There's scholarly debate about why segmented sleep disappeared. Some blame the rise of artificial lighting, candles, then oil lamps, then gas and electric lights, that stretch the day and compress the night. Others think it's a cultural shift. As time became money and productivity became a virtue, we reshaped sleep into a more efficient 8-hour block. But for centuries, this gap in the middle of the night was just part of the rhythm of life. It wasn't broken sleep, it was just different. You lean back against the wall and listen. Somewhere in the distance, a bell tolls once, maybe a monastic call to matins, or maybe just the hour striking from a forgotten chapel tower. It's impossible to say, but the sound rolls through the stillness like a stone dropped into water, gentle but deep. And then, silence again. You find yourself breathing slower, not from tiredness, but from calm. No screens, no deadlines, just time. Time to sit, to be awake without demand. There's something luxurious about it in the strangest way, like your body has remembered something your modern mind forgot. You lie back down eventually, not because you're trying to force sleep, but because you can. Your body, now still and rested, begins to soften. The covers settle over your chest. Your nightcap slides down a little over your eyes. You pull it back just slightly and smile to yourself in the dark. This pause between sleeps isn't a flaw in the system. It is the system. You close your eyes. The second sleep comes slowly, like the tide returning. No urgency, no pressure. Just the old rhythm, the one people followed for generations. You're not out of place here, not tonight. You're part of it. And as you slip back into sleep, the castle holds you again. Not tightly, but steadily. Like a structure that understands how nights are meant to unfold. Not in one long, exhausted blackout, but in waves, in intervals, in human-sized fragments of rest. Your second sleep ends not with sunlight, but with bells, low, deliberate, echoing through the thick stone walls like thunder in molasses. You stir, confused at first, before remembering you're not just in a castle, you're in a monastery. Or at least a monastic guest chamber, and it's still dark enough that the moon is doing most of the lighting. The bells toll again, each strike pulling you further from your warm cocoon and into a very particular kind of medieval reality, one where waking at 3 a.m. for prayer is not strange. It's expected. You sit up, rubbing your eyes with gloved hands. The air is colder than it was an hour ago, if that's even possible. Your breath fogs in front of your face like a ghost fleeing your mouth. Outside the door you hear the quiet rustle of sandals on stone, the creak of old wood, the murmured shuffle of a dozen others, monks, novices, perhaps a guest or two, all rising for matins, the first service of the day, or the last of the night, depending on how you want to frame it. Your chamber is small and austere. One straw-stuffed mattress on a wooden platform, one narrow window, one rough wool blanket, and a crucifix on the wall that seems to watch you with silent judgment. There's a tiny clay oil lamp burning low on the windowsill, giving off more smoke than light. and you pull your cloak tight around your shoulders before daring to move. Here's your historical fact. Monastic schedules in the medieval period were rigid, relentless, and completely structured around the divine office, 8 prayer services spaced out across every 24-hour cycle. Matins, which often began in the pitch-black hours after midnight, was the longest and most intense. Monks would rise from their hard beds, often without speaking, and file into the cold stone chapel to chant psalms in Latin for hours. This wasn't a one-off spiritual boot camp, it was every single night, for life. You shuffle toward the chapel with the others, feet sliding over ancient flagstones that have been worn down by centuries of similar footsteps. No one talks, they don't need to. This rhythm has been etched into their bones, and even as a visitor, you're swept up in it. The hallway is dim, lit by wall-mounted oil lamps and the occasional sputtering candle. The air smells of wax, incense, damp stone, and something indefinably old. Like time itself is rotting gently in the walls. You enter the chapel, and it's exactly as you imagined. Tall, echoing, hauntingly beautiful in its simplicity. Rows of wooden stalls line the walls, polished smooth by generations of monks sitting, standing, kneeling and repeating. The only light comes from a central candle, and the silhouettes of robed figures move with the grace of ritual. You find a spot at the back, not sure what's expected of you, but knowing enough to stay quiet. The chanting begins slowly, single voices layered one over another, like threads weaving a fabric of sound. Latin, steady, solemn. The cadence rises and falls in a rhythm that feels older than the language itself. It's not beautiful in a performance sense, but in a way that makes you feel like you've stepped outside of time, and maybe, just a little, outside of your body. Fringe fact, Matins was believed to be the most spiritually potent hour, a time when the soul was closest to God, unencumbered by the distractions of daylight or food or conversation. Some mystics even claim to have visions during these early hours, caught between the dream world and waking life, which honestly checks out. You haven't had coffee, your feet are half frozen, and you're pretty sure your mind left your body 15 minutes ago. You stay through most of the service, alternating between seated and standing positions as the monks shift in unison. There's comfort in the repetition, even if you don't understand the words. You start to notice the way the sound fills the space, not with volume, but with presence. The chants don't just echo, they settle. Into the wood, into the stone, into you. Eventually the service winds down. A few monks remain in silent prayer while others file out to begin their day. Yes, begin. It's barely 5 a.m, and already the community is in motion. Some head to the kitchen, others to the scriptorium, the gardens, or the animal pens. Their lives are built around labour and devotion, each hour accounted for, each action a form of worship. You return to your chamber in a haze of incense and sleep deprivation, unsure whether to crawl back into bed or stay up and pretend you're now a functioning adult. Your feet are numb, your shoulders ache from the cold, and yet there's something deeply grounding about the experience. You weren't warm, you weren't comfortable, but you were part of something, a system, a rhythm, a night that had purpose. There's scholarly discussion about whether the extreme discipline of monastic sleep was sustainable, or even healthy. Some argue that monks shortened their lives with this constant interruption of rest. Others point to the consistency, the meditative benefits, the way spiritual practice might have offset physical exhaustion. The truth probably lies somewhere in between, equal parts holiness and hypothermia. You crawl back under the wool blanket, still wearing every layer you brought. The straw mattress is lumpy, the pillow is hard, and the air has turned from cold to glacial, but your body is strangely willing. You've passed through something. Endured the long stretch of night in a place that breathes silence and prayer, and now your eyes begin to close, not from fatigue alone, but from surrender, to the cold, to the quiet, to the rhythm of a life that doesn't bend for comfort, but finds meaning in discipline. The castle, or monastery rather, remains still. Outside, the first hint of dawn is a pale smudge behind the hills. Inside, you drift into what might be a third sleep, if such a thing exists. And maybe here, it does. You're awake again, this time not by bells or cold, but by a loud snort, followed by a shuffle, then the unmistakable grunt of an animal stretching its legs. somewhere very, very close. You blink, sit up, and yes, there it is. A pig. In your room. Well, not your room exactly. Tonight, you're experiencing what many medieval folks, especially peasants, knew as their regular nighttime reality. Sleeping with animals. Not metaphorically, not romantically, literally. It's hard to pinpoint exactly when this happened. One moment, you're drifting off in what felt like a relatively peaceful little cottage chamber. Small, smoky, but private enough. And the next, you're being serenaded by a barnyard medley at an extremely disrespectful hour. There's a goat chewing cud near the hearth. Chickens are roosting in the rafters. You're pretty sure there's a cat pressed against your leg, or possibly a small child, but at this point it's too dark and too warm to investigate. At first the chaos seems intolerable. You pull your wool blanket tighter, nose wrinkling at the smell, a thick bouquet of hay, manure and something damp you hope is just a spilled bucket of water. But then, something unexpected happens. You start to warm up, like really warm up, the kind of warmth that comes from a cluster of living, breathing bodies packed together in a small space. The goat shifts closer. The pig sighs in its sleep. You, the 21st century human, are now the middle spoon in an interspecies cuddle pile. And surprisingly, it works. Here's your historical fact. In the medieval period, it was common, especially among peasants and lower-income households, for animals and humans to share sleeping quarters. Not because of sentimentality or attachment, but because animals generated heat. Chickens, pigs, goats, and even cows could significantly raise the ambient temperature of a room just by existing. In harsh winters with no central heating and leaky thatch roofs, they were four-legged radiators. People weren't particularly bothered by it either. These weren't pets, not in the modern sense. They were valuable resources, sources of milk, meat, labour, and yes, warmth. Bringing them inside for the night was practical. You needed your animals alive. You needed you alive. The solution? Sleep together. That's the medieval way. You lie there, slightly disgusted and slightly amused, while the goat next to you lets out a quiet sneeze. You wipe your face, thankful it wasn't directed your way, and listen to the night soundtrack, hooves clopping softly on wooden planks, feathers ruffling, the occasional sleepy cluck or oink. It's not peaceful, but it's oddly reassuring. There's life here. Warm, breathing, snorting life. Fringe fact. In some cultures, particularly in Scandinavia and the British Isles, there were even superstitions that sleeping near animals brought good fortune or spiritual protection. Cats were thought to ward off evil spirits. Dogs could alert you to danger. Pigs were, well, pigs. But they were warm and that counted for something. You glance at the hearth. A few embers remain from the fire, casting a dull red glow. The goat seems to be drawn to it, inching closer with every snore. You worry briefly about what happens if it gets too close, but then again, this is clearly not the goat's first night indoors. It probably knows its limits better than you do. There's a small child curled up near the door, wrapped in a fur blanket that's more hair than textile. His breath is steady. His bare feet poke out, dangerously close to the cold air sneaking in under the door. You nudge the extra corner of your cloak toward him and shift closer to the pig, who doesn't even flinch. You're now officially part of the ecosystem. Now, scholars still debate whether this kind of arrangement was truly common across all of Europe, or more typical in colder regions or among the poorest families. But archaeological evidence, plus a healthy dose of written complaint from visitors who weren't used to it, suggests that co-sleeping with livestock was far from rare. It wasn't ideal, but it wasn't shameful either. It was life. You find yourself dozing again, lulled not by silence, but by the soft ambient rhythm of sleep shared between species. You've been alone in towers, surrounded by stone, sealed in with curtains. But this chaotic warmth, is oddly more comforting. It's like being wrapped in a living blanket that shifts and breathes around you. You imagine the families who did this every night. The grandmother in the corner, the parents, the children, the animals all bundled together in one smoky room, layered in wool and love and necessity. They didn't sleep apart because they couldn't afford to, but also maybe because they didn't need to. Maybe warmth was just another kind of closeness, a different kind of kinship. The goat lets out one long, groaning bleat in its sleep, and you chuckle under your breath. You're not getting uninterrupted rest tonight. Not unless someone invents a soundproof barn. But you are surviving, and in this century, in this season, that's the real goal. You roll to your side, adjusting your limbs around the pig, who's now snoring, and close your eyes. The rushes under your blanket crinkle softly. The scent is still earthy and not great, but your nose is getting used to it. You'll probably smell like hay and goat sweat tomorrow, but right now you're warm, you're fed, you're not alone. And in a castle, or a cottage, that's more than enough. Tonight the wind is different, sharper, meaner. It slices through the castle's cracks and crevices like a knife, howling down chimneys, rattling shutters, and flinging sleet against the walls like handfuls of pebbles. You're starting to realise this isn't just a chilly evening in the 1300s, this is something else. Something worse. This is the Little Ice Age, and you're feeling it settle in like an unwanted roommate. You've been relocated again, this time to a guest room on the second floor, what would have once been considered a good spot, away from the stables and damp lower chambers, yet not so high up that you freeze like meat in a forgotten cellar. But even here, the cold has teeth. You sit near the hearth, watching the flames flicker like they're fighting for their lives. They don't reach far. Your hands warm, but your back stays cold. It's like standing in front of a bonfire while someone throws snowballs at your neck. The walls seem to be weeping tonight. Literal droplets gather on the stone, the moisture from the warm room meeting the icy bite of the wind beyond. You run your finger along the wall and it comes away wet. You stare at the droplet like it's a clue to some ancient mystery, but the only real answer is, winter's getting worse, much worse. Here's your historical fact. The Little Ice Age wasn't one event, but a series of colder than usual periods that stretched roughly from the 14th to the 19th century. In Europe, winters became longer, harsher, and far more unpredictable. Rivers like the Thames froze solid, crops failed, famines became more frequent. Castles that had been survivable in earlier centuries became death traps if not properly maintained, or occupied by the very rich. The average temperature dropped by just a couple degrees, but that was enough to throw everything off balance. Growing seasons shortened, food became scarce, heating methods had to evolve, or more often be improvised. And you? You're improvising right now, wrapping a sheepskin tighter around your shoulders while trying to convince your toes they still belong to you. You lie in bed, if you can call this pile of scratchy linen and barely warm furs a bed, and huddle with everything you've got. You've dragged the fire-warmed stones under the covers again, but tonight they're losing the battle fast. You're not even sure if it's possible to sleep with your jaw clenched this tightly. Every time you start to relax, another gust of wind slaps against the shutters like a drunk trying to pick a fight. Fringe fact, during the coldest years of the Little Ice Age, people got inventive. They layered not just clothing, but air. Mattress stacking became a thing. Feather bed on top of straw mattress on top of animal hide. Bed curtains were doubled up. People wore gloves and hats to sleep. Some even added fur-lined sleeping sacks, like very early, extremely luxurious sleeping bags. And in poorer households, sleep meant huddling together with family, neighbours, even strangers, whoever you could get into the bed. Warmth wasn't private, it was a group project. You peek out from under your blanket and eye the fireplace. The fire's dying again. You debate whether to get up and poke it or let it die and accept your fate. Ultimately, you choose comfort over effort, because the thought of leaving your sheepskin sanctuary is a threat to your personal safety. There's scholarly debate about just how widespread the impact of the Little Ice Age really was. Some argue it's overstated, that the effects were regional and not as dramatic as popular history suggests. Others insist the data proves a major climatic shift that affected agriculture, migration, architecture, even mental health. Based on your current first-hand experience of trying to fall asleep while your breath freezes mid-air, you're inclined to side with Team Yikes it was cold. You shift your legs, trying to find a spot in the bed that doesn't feel like frozen cabbage. No luck. The linen sheets are stiff from the damp, and the straw mattress below feels like it was stuffed with reeds and regret. You curl tighter, pulling your knees to your chest, hoping to conserve heat in the smallest possible shape. You're basically a human croissant now, a cold, itchy croissant. A draft sneaks through a crack in the shutter, and suddenly it's not just your nose that's cold, it's your soul. You mutter a very unholy curse and yank the blanket higher. Somewhere downstairs you hear the groan of the wood, maybe a beam shifting, maybe the castle protesting the same weather you are. It's hard to tell whether the structure is creaking or just complaining, and yet, even as your body shivers, you notice something strange, how the castle sounds different during this kind of cold. The silence is sharper, the wind has a personality now, vicious, sarcastic, relentless. Every draft becomes a character in this miserable play, each gust a line of dialogue you didn't ask for. The cold isn't just a condition, it's a presence. You try to remember what warmth even feels like. You picture summer, bright sun, sweating under layers of wool, the itchiness of heat rather than cold. At this point, even a lukewarm bath would feel like a spa treatment. But those are distant dreams. Right now it's just you, the stone, the furs, and the wind. A medieval quartet playing the Symphony of Suffering in G minor. Still, eventually, exhaustion wins. Your body, tired of shivering, begins to relax by force. You slip into a strange kind of sleep. Fitful, shallow, but rest all the same. Your dreams are vivid, strange, touched by the cold. You dream of fire that won't catch, of warm bread just out of reach, of wandering through snow barefoot while someone tells you this is normal for this time of year. You wake once more near dawn, breath still visible, limbs numb, but not frozen. Not quite. You've survived another night, and in the little ice age that counts as a solid win. Tonight, things are different. There's music in the halls, candles flicker in every window, the scent of roasting meat, warm ale, and something sweet, maybe honey or cinnamon, drifts up the stairs and curls around your nose like an invitation. And for the first time in what feels like 100 years, you're not trudging to bed like a defeated soldier returning from the front lines of frostbite. No, tonight is a festival night. Winter has not gone away, but for a few short hours, it's been told to stay outside. You're in the Great Hall again, but it's unrecognisable. The fire is massive, roaring like a beast in the hearth, casting golden light across long wooden tables stacked with trenchers, pitchers, bread loaves, and so many kinds of meat you lose count. There's music, someone thumping a drum, another strumming a harp, and laughter, loud and frequent, echoing off the rafters with such joy that it drowns out the wind beyond the walls. You feel like you've stumbled into a medieval snow globe full of warmth, food, and temporary forgetfulness. It's a winter festival night, likely around the solstice, or maybe during Christmastide, which in medieval Europe stretched well beyond just December 25th. You're wrapped in your thickest cloak, still a little damp from snow that clings to the hem, but inside none of that matters. You're handed a wooden cup of warm spiced ale and a slice of meat that tastes like celebration. And for once, your body stops tensing against the cold. You sit, you eat, you drink, and eventually, as the fire burns lower and the dancing slows, people begin to sleep. But no one goes off to their chambers. Not tonight. Tonight, the hall itself becomes a bedchamber. Here's your historical fact. During winter feasts and holy days, it wasn't unusual for large groups, guests, servants, even the Lord's own family, to sleep right there in the hall after the festivities ended. Beds would be made from cloaks, blankets, and straw thrown down across the rush-covered floor. The fire remained stoked all night, and the shared body heat of dozens of people kept the space warmer than most private rooms ever could. You claim a spot not far from the hearth, tucking your cloak beneath you like a mattress and pulling a fur over your shoulders. Someone nearby offers you another drink, a weaker ale this time, meant to settle the stomach and warm the limbs. You sip it slowly, letting the warmth bloom in your chest. Around you, people are laughing in their sleep or snoring or murmuring prayers. It's crowded, loud, and deeply communal. You've spent so many nights trying to escape the cold alone. Tonight, you're facing it together. And here's a fringe fact that's as delightful as it is weird. In some regions, during the darkest days of winter, people believed that the warmth of community, the literal heat generated by bodies gathered in celebration, had magical properties. Some even claimed it could repel evil spirits or bring blessings for the coming year. You look around at the red noses, the crumpled cloaks, the breadcrumbs on chins, and honestly, you kind of believe it. There's something infectious about this energy. People tell stories, some in Latin, some in local dialects you only half understand. You catch phrases about saints, monsters, snow demons, and one particularly suspicious goat. Someone sings a song with no melody but a lot of feeling, and no one tells them to stop. Another guest quietly braids rushes into little patterns, setting them by the fire as if they might protect the sleepers from frost or worse. You lie back and stare at the high, smoke-darkened beams above. The air is thick with heat, laughter, sweat and smoke. It clings to your skin, your clothes, your lungs. But it's not unpleasant. It's human. For once, you don't smell like damp stone and cold desperation. You smell like roasted meat and pine branches dragged in from the forest. A dog curls up at your side, whether invited or not, and you gladly let it. Scholars talk a lot about medieval festivals, how they were structured around the agricultural calendar, how they served to reinforce social hierarchy, how they offered brief reprieve from the relentless grind of survival. But they rarely talk about how important warmth was during these nights. Not just physical warmth, but emotional, psychological. When the days were short, the ground frozen, and death always a little too close, nights like these reminded people what they were living for. The fire pops again, sending up a brief cascade of sparks. You turn onto your side, your face warm, your back cold, but overall content. Around you, the hall is beginning to quiet. People shift in their nests of blankets. A few snores rise above the murmurs. The musicians have put down their instruments. Even the ale is finally running low. And now, sleep begins to settle. Not because you're exhausted, though you are, but because you're safe. You're held in warmth, in noise, in togetherness. There's a kind of dream you have only in moments like this. Not the anxious kind, not the confusing kind, but the dream that comes when you fall asleep full, warm, and surrounded by people who are just as tired, just as full, just as warm as you are. You're not drifting off alone in a freezing stone box tonight. You're part of a living tapestry of breath, laughter, and layered cloaks. You're not surviving winter, you're dancing through it, even if only for one night. As your eyes close, the last thing you feel is the gentle shift of the dog at your feet, curling tighter. Someone nearby coughs, then sighs. Another voice mutters something about stars. You smile, not quite understanding the words, but understanding the feeling. Tonight, the cold didn't win. Not even close. You wake to the smell of smoke and wool and someone else's morning breath. The great hall is quiet now, save for the soft crackle of dying embers in the hearth and the occasional creak of someone stretching too quickly after a long floor-bound sleep. Your limbs protest as you sit up, your hip reminding you that stone, straw and beer are a powerful but unforgiving combination. The fur you pulled over yourself during the feast has half slipped away, and the dog that claimed your feet sometime during the night is now using your shin as a pillow. You let it stay. It's earned it. You all have. As you look around, you spot cloaks tossed over benches, a pile of now empty trenchers in the corner, and a line of sleeping forms curled like commas across the rush-covered floor. The fire's dying, but the room still holds the memory of last night's warmth like a shared secret. You bundle up again, not because you're cold now, but because you know it's coming. You know what waits for you the moment you step outside this bubble of human heat and celebration. And so tonight, your final night in this slow, freezing journey through medieval slumber, you turn your attention to what it all came down to, more than fire or feast or fur, wool. Not the soft merino from modern shops. Not that one sweater in your closet that actually breathes well and makes you look like a confident traveller on a weekend in the Alps. No, medieval wool was heavy, it was scratchy. It smelled like sheep in the rain. But it was life. The peasants wore it. The nobles layered it. The monks practically wrapped themselves in it like spiritual burritos. And at night, whether you were snuggled between feather mattresses or huddled beside pigs, wool was there. You run your hand over your blanket, a dense, tightly woven rectangle of survival. It's stiff from use, and probably laced with a bit of leftover mead and goat hair. But it works. Even in the great stone refrigerator that is this castle, you were warm. And that's thanks to this scratchy miracle fibre. Here's your historical fact. Wool was the dominant fabric of medieval Europe. Not just for clothing, but for bedding, curtains, even wall hangings. Its insulating properties were unparalleled at the time, unlike linen, which was breathable but didn't trap heat well, or silk, which was outrageously expensive and offered little protection against the cold. Wool was the material that kept people alive through winter after winter. It absorbed moisture without feeling wet. It held heat close to the body, and importantly, it was relatively easy to produce locally. Sheep were everywhere, especially in Britain and the Low Countries. Wool became not just a material, but an economy, a lifeline, and a livelihood. Fringe fact: in some towns, laws were passed requiring people to be buried in wool. That's right, buried. It was part of a 17th century effort in England to bolster the wool trade, but the sentiment existed earlier. Wool was sacred. It followed you from cradle to grave and sometimes into the afterlife. You didn't just wear wool, you lived in it. You stand and wrap your cloak tightly around you, feeling its familiar weight settle across your shoulders like armour. There's something comforting in its texture, even if it does itch a bit when it rubs against your neck. You layer it over your tunic, your hose, your second shirt, your linen undershirt, because that's another truth you've learned on this journey. Medieval layering was an art form. You didn't just throw on one warm garment, you built heat, from the skin out, linen to wick sweat, wool to hold warmth, fur for insulation, a cloak to block wind. Each layer added to the tiny fortress you carried around your body. And when you slept, you carried that fortress into bed with you, literally. You think about the noble lady in her bedchamber, her wool-lined mattress stacked with furs and featherbeds. The servant huddled beside the kitchen fire, wool shawl wrapped tightly as a second skin. The monk in his cell, wrapped in a simple habit, covered in a blanket likely passed down through 5 abbots before him. The peasant family curled together on a wooden platform, sharing cloaks and breaths, and the scent of lanolin rising from every stitch. There's scholarly debate about how refined medieval wool garments really were. Some argue they were coarsely made, heavy and awkward. Others suggest skilled weavers and fullers created surprisingly fine fabrics, especially for the wealthy. But regardless of the finish, wool was trusted. It was always there. It was what you reached for first when winter clawed at your door or your windowless cottage wall. You settle back down near the fire, poking the last of the embers with a stick until they flare one last time. It won't last, but it's something. People are starting to wake now. The hall murmurs with groggy voices and stretching limbs. Someone is coughing, someone else is laughing softly, already retelling stories from the night before. You hear a child ask for bread, and someone else yawn loud enough to shake the rafters. No one's in a rush. Everyone is soaking up the last bits of shared warmth before the day begins. Your blanket still clings to your shoulders, and you find yourself grateful for it in a way that's hard to articulate. Not just because it kept you warm, but because it reminds you that warmth in this world isn't just about fire or fortune. It's about layers, not just literal ones, but layers of community, effort, ingenuity, and adaptation. People in castles didn't survive winter by accident. They planned for it. They worked for it. They wove their lives around it, sometimes quite literally. As you stretch out your legs and pull your cloak around you like a second skin, you understand something simple and beautiful. In the Middle Ages, survival wasn't one dramatic gesture. It was thousands of small choices. A log on the fire, a wool cap before bed, a hot stone placed at your feet, a goat brought inside for the night, a blanket, scratchy and thick, pulled up just high enough to cover your ears. Wool didn't make winter pleasant, but it made it possible. Tonight, everything hurts. Your back is sore, your legs are stiff. Your neck feels like it's been in a tug-of-war with gravity. And worst of all, you're still in your chainmail. That's right. Tonight, you're sleeping in armour, and not metaphorically either. You're spending the night as a soldier on watch, or a night between battles, or maybe just some poor fool who didn't have time to take off his gear before collapsing on whatever horizontal surface he could find. Either way, this is the least glamorous night of your medieval sleep saga. You lie down, or attempt to, on a wooden bench in a corner chamber near the outer curtain wall. The room is small, stark, and smells vaguely of damp leather and regret. There's no mattress, no blanket, and certainly no featherbed. Just a stack of old sacks and a wool cloak that someone had the decency to throw over your legs. The fire in the brazier is long dead, and the torch in the iron sconce is spitting smoke like it's holding a grudge. The stone beneath you is cold. Your chainmail is colder. You try to shift into a more comfortable position, but every movement is accompanied by a chorus of tiny clinks, like coins falling one by one into a donation box. Your armour is tight across the shoulders, loose at the knees, and absolutely determined to bite into your collarbone every time you exhale. It's not even a full suit, just a hauberk and coif over padded gambeson, but it may as well be a prison. Here's your historical fact. Medieval soldiers, guards, and knights sometimes had to sleep in their armour. Not because they wanted to, and certainly not because it was encouraged, but because war doesn't pause for bedtime. In a siege, on a march, or when an attack was expected at any moment, there was simply no time or safety to strip down. So they slept ready. Not well, but ready. You lie there, one arm across your chest, the other pinned awkwardly beneath your side, and realise your ribs feel like they've been individually offended. You try curling onto your side, but the chainmail drags with you, like a stubborn cat refusing to be picked up. It shifts slightly, pulling at the gambeson underneath, and you feel a draft sneak in somewhere between the links. That's the cruel irony of armour. It's heavy, it's hot when you're active, and yet somehow, at night, it doesn't keep you warm. It holds cold like a grudge. Fringe fact for the night. There were medieval legends about knights who wore their armour for so long that it had to be cut off them when peace finally came. Whether it's truth, exaggeration, or symbolic of the weight they carried, it tells you something about how closely armour became fused with identity. You were a knight, a guard, a warrior, and you slept like one, whether you liked it or not. The sounds of the night are different here. No pigs, no feasting, no monks chanting in Latin. Just the wind battering the stone and the occasional call from a watchman on the wall. You hear boots above, someone doing rounds on the parapet. Another figure coughs in the next room, and maybe another guard, equally miserable. You wonder how often this kind of sleep was all someone got. 20 minutes here, an hour there, never quite letting your body truly rest. There's some academic debate about how much sleep soldiers actually got in these conditions. Some historians argue that short, broken rest was common, especially during campaigns or sieges. Others suggest rotations and guard shifts were arranged to allow at least a few uninterrupted hours. But either way, sleep while armoured was never meant to be restful. It was a compromise between exhaustion and fear. You pull the cloak higher over your chest and try not to think about how much your shoulders hurt. The gambeson underneath the chainmail is padded, but it's also soaked through with days of sweat, dirt and rain. You smell like a battlefield, and not in a poetic way, more like someone left a pile of wet burlap in the sun, then rolled it in a field. Your mind drifts to knights returning from battle, collapsing beside their horses, too tired to strip off anything but their gloves, or to soldiers huddled in towers, expecting an attack by morning, sleeping fully dressed with weapons within arm's reach. You imagine one hand resting on the hilt of a sword, the other gripping the edge of a shield like a child clutching a blanket. Not out of glory, but out of sheer, persistent necessity. Eventually your eyes close, not because you're comfortable, but because your body has given up arguing. You don't fall asleep so much as shut down, like a candle burning down to the wick. Your dreams are disjointed, metal clashing, banners snapping in wind, endless rows of faceless enemies. You wake up every hour, shifting slightly, groaning quietly, then slipping back into that strange armour-bound limbo between wakefulness and unconsciousness. At one point, your hand slips from beneath the cloak and hits the cold stone floor. The shock wakes you completely. You pull your hand back under, press it against your chest and close your eyes again. The chainmail presses against your cheek. You can feel individual rings leaving their imprint on your skin. In the morning, you'll look like you fell asleep on a pile of chain-linked doilies. You wonder, briefly, how many men slept like this the night before a battle, uncomfortable, anxious, too tired to think but too alert to rest. You wonder if they woke feeling ready, or simply relieved they woke at all. Eventually light creeps through a slit window, casting a pale grey across the chamber. Your body is stiff. Your mouth is dry. Your back hates you. You feel like a knight who's been through a battle just from trying to sleep. You sit up slowly, joints crackling, muscles sore, and the chainmail clinks and groans along with you like an exhausted companion. You didn't sleep well, but you slept armed, and in this world that might have been the most important thing. Tonight, you don't get to sleep. Or rather, you try, but every time your eyes start to close, the sound of distant shouting, footsteps on stone, or the unmistakable thrum of tension in the air snaps you back awake. You're not the only one. Everyone in the castle is on edge. You're not facing a snowstorm, or a leaky window, or a mattress stuffed with straw and poor decisions. Tonight the castle is under siege, and warmth, comfort, a proper night's rest, those aren't even on the menu. It started earlier in the evening, with horns echoing across the hills. Scouts spotted movement beyond the trees, torches on the ridge, riders too far off to greet but too close to ignore. Since then, the entire fortress has shifted into something else, something tense and humming with unspoken fear. Doors have been barred, water jugs hauled up from the well, arrows counted and recounted, and you're trying to pretend that you're not afraid to sleep. You're stationed in a chamber near the wall walk, high enough to hear the wind, low enough to hear boots on the courtyard cobblestones. The room is dark, lit only by a single oil lamp that sputters like it's anxious too. There's a straw mattress in the corner, but no one's using it. The bed has become a table, a ledge. A makeshift seat for the younger squire, who is clutching a dagger with a white-knuckled grip and refusing to blink. You huddle in your cloak near the wall, your back to the cold stone. You're layered in wool, linen and anxiety. Your sword, if you can call this rusted thing a sword, is propped nearby. The walls around you groan in the wind, or maybe that's just your imagination. You've never been more aware of how loud everything is. Your breath, the scrape of your boot, the creak of the wooden shutter as the wind pokes its fingers through every crack. Here's your historical fact. Sleeping during a siege was a luxury few could afford. Days and nights blurred into one long sleepless watch. Guards rotated through shifts, nobles strategized late into the night, and peasants pressed into interior rooms to wait out whatever might come. Sometimes sieges lasted days, sometimes months. You weren't expected to get full nights of sleep. You were expected to be alert enough to not die. You sit still and listen. Somewhere above you hear the shout of a sentry. A pause, then nothing. Maybe it was a fox. Maybe it was the first arrow. Maybe it was just someone tripping on a loose stone. You don't know. That's the hardest part. The not knowing. The stillness before whatever's next. Fringe fact. There are accounts of people hallucinating during sieges from lack of sleep, hunger, and fear. Some claim to see saints or demons pacing the battlements. Others reported hearing songs in the night, or voices that didn't belong to anyone. Scholars today call it stress-induced delirium. You call it probably your future, if this siege lasts more than another 2 days. The chamber is crowded now, 6 or 7 people crammed into a space meant for 2. One of them is the old gatekeeper, who keeps muttering the same story about the last siege he lived through, back when the river froze and they had to eat the dogs. No one asks if that's literal. You don't want to know. You rest your head against the wall. Just for a moment. Just to stretch your neck and let your eyelids droop. But the moment you do, someone jostles you, and you're wide awake again. A torch flares outside the door. The guard passes by without looking in. You don't blame him. Everyone's too busy, too tired to bother with pleasantries. It's like the whole castle has forgotten how to be human in the face of what waits beyond the gates. There's scholarly debate over how often sieges really turned into full-on starvation nightmares. Some sources exaggerate, others downplay the horrors, but one thing is certain, sleep was sacrificed first. Even before the bread ran out, before the sickness started, before the arrows flew, you lost sleep. The mind became the first casualty. You rub your face with frozen hands and try to calculate how long you've been awake. Is it a full day? 2? You caught a nap during the afternoon maybe, but that was light sleep. Not real. Not the kind where you dream. Not the kind where your body repairs itself. This is a different kind of exhaustion now. A buzzing in your bones, a fuzziness behind your eyes. You close them again, just for a second, and immediately you're in some half-dream where the castle is melting, and the bells are ringing and someone's calling your name in a language you don't speak. Then the door slams open, and you're yanked back into waking life with your heart pounding like a war drum. False alarm. A new guard shift. Just another hour. You slump back against the wall, swallowing the frustration, the fear, the fact that you want nothing more than a warm bed, a closed curtain, and enough peace to unclench your jaw. But tonight, that's not happening. Tonight, you'll do what people have done for centuries in castles just like this. You'll grab 5 minutes of sleep when you can, lean against a wall and rest your eyes. Let your head nod forward once, twice, then snap back up before anyone notices. You'll dream with your eyes open and wake up wondering what's real. You'll survive the night by pieces. The torchlight outside dims again. The cold creeps in. Somewhere in the dark the enemy waits, and you, wrapped in wool, sleep-starved, and half-frozen, wait too. But you don't sleep. Not tonight. The wind has died down tonight, and for once the castle feels still, but not peaceful. There's a heavy quiet hanging in the air, thicker than fog, heavier than stone. The kind of quiet that doesn't come from rest but from exhaustion, from bodies pushed past their limit, from days without sun and nights without sleep. You're in a side chamber now, tucked into what used to be a chapel and is now something else entirely, a makeshift infirmary, and the only thing worse than not sleeping is watching others try to. You lie on the floor beside a bundle of rags you're calling a pillow, breathing in the mingled scent of herbs, sour linens, and something sharper, something that smells like sickness. Around you are the groans and coughs of people who didn't get out of the way fast enough. Castle life, already hard enough in winter, has been invaded by something worse than cold, worse than war, disease. It started as a cough, then a fever, then more bodies arriving in the night. Now the chapel is filled wall to wall with moaning, shivering figures wrapped in wool and whatever dignity they still have left. Some sleep, some don't. A few thrash in their beds, caught in fever dreams. You don't know who half these people are. You don't ask. Here's your historical fact. Castles were breeding grounds for disease. The combination of close quarters, poor sanitation, and limited airflow meant that once illness entered the walls, it spread fast. Typhoid, dysentery, the plague, even just influenza could devastate a garrison or a household. In winter it was even worse. Windows stayed shut, waste froze in the corners, and everyone slept closer together in the name of warmth. Germ theory didn't exist yet, but people knew. They knew that when someone started coughing in the Great Hall, it was only a matter of time. You shift slightly, wincing as you disturb your hip. You haven't slept well in days, and now you're sharing a room with people who might not wake up at all. Your body aches from the cold, from the straw mat, from the weight of your own bones. But it's nothing compared to the sounds around you. Raspy breaths, muttered prayers, the occasional sob. And somewhere near the altar, a priest who hasn't slept in just as long is mumbling last rites for the second time tonight. You're not even sure if you're sick. You might be. Your throat is scratchy and your skin feels hot one moment, cold the next. But it could just be fatigue, or fear, or both. You pull your cloak tighter, tugging it up over your mouth and nose like a makeshift barrier against the invisible enemy that's crept into the castle and laid claim to the night. Fringe fact, during the Black Death, people believed that illness was spread by bad smells, miasmas, so they burned herbs, carried scented sachets, even stuffed flowers into their bed linens to purify the air. Here in this chapel-turned-sick room, someone has followed that tradition. A clay bowl of rosemary and lavender smoulders in the corner, filling the space with a smoky sweetness that does almost nothing to hide the scent of sweat and despair. You try to close your eyes, to pretend you're anywhere else, but sleep isn't coming. Not really. Your body is too tense. Your mind won't slow down. You can't help listening to every cough, every shift of straw, every distant footstep from the corridor. You've never felt more fragile, less because of the cold, and more because you're realizing just how thin the veil is between life and death in this place. There's some debate among historians about how illness affected castle sleep routines. Some argue that people simply carried on, resting when they could, ignoring symptoms until they couldn't be ignored. Others suggest that households would shut down entire wings, moving healthy occupants into isolation, or even abandoning castles completely during outbreaks. You're not sure which version of history you're living through. No one said much. There's just an understanding. Don't get too close. Don't breathe too deeply. Don't ask questions. You turn your face into your blanket, trying to find a patch that doesn't smell like mildew. The air is too warm now, thick with illness and breath. Even the stone walls seem to sweat. You'd kill for a cold draft right now, a reminder that the outside world still exists, that there's life beyond this room. But this is your reality now. A place once used for prayers and weddings and candlelit ceremony now reduced to a holding pen for the sick. The stained glass windows above have gone dark, their colours muted in the gloom. Someone coughs again, wet, hacking, painful, and you resist the urge to pull your blanket higher. You've already covered everything you can. You wonder how people did it, how they slept through plague years, famine winters, sick beds crowded into chapels and kitchens. Maybe they didn't. Maybe, like you, they simply rested in fragments. Snatches of sleep caught between fear and responsibility. Maybe that was the best they could hope for. Eventually your body gives in, not to real sleep, but to that shallow drift you've come to recognize. A limbo of awareness. Your limbs go slack, your breathing evens out, but your mind is still half watching, still half listening. You dream briefly of warmth and fresh air and a bed that doesn't stink of rosemary and rot. Then you're jolted awake by someone nearby crying out in their sleep. You blink, heart racing, and remember exactly where you are. And somehow, that might be the worst part. You're not afraid of dying. You're afraid of not being able to rest before it happens. The castle is quiet tonight, not the tense, brittle quiet of a siege. Not the heavy hush of sickness, but a deeper kind of silence. The one that comes after everything. After the fire's gone out, after the laughter's faded, after the fear has passed, or at least grown tired of pacing the halls. It's the kind of silence that doesn't ask for attention. It just waits, like snow on a roof, like breath held under the covers. And tonight, in that silence, you finally get the chance to ask yourself, would you survive a winter here? You're back in your own chamber now. Or at least the best you've had. One last wool blanket tucked around your shoulders, a final ember flickering in the hearth like it knows the show's about to end. You lie still, cocooned in everything you've learned, about beds stuffed with straw, about curtains that hold in heat like secrets, about hot stones wrapped in rags and slippers lined with fur. You've layered your tunic, your shirt, your hose, your cloak, your toes are warm, your breath is soft. And yet, sleep still feels like something to be earned. It's strange, isn't it? After all these nights with monks and pigs and guards and wind that sounded like wolves, you've come to accept that medieval sleep isn't really about comfort. It's about endurance, about small victories, like finding the least damp corner of a mattress, or waking up with 10 fingers and toes still attached, or not being crushed by the curtain rod falling on your head in the middle of the night, which, let's face it, was a real possibility in these timber-frame death traps. So now, tucked in as well as you'll ever be, you ask yourself the question that's been building through every draft and nightmare and goat-related incident. Would you make it? Really make it? Could you live like this? Not just for one night, not for a week of authentic historical experience, but for whole winters. Long, brutal stretches of frost and famine and freezing nights that make your bones ache before you fall asleep. Here's your historical fact. Most people didn't, not every year. Infant mortality soared in winter. Elders died quietly in their beds, or beside them. Entire communities lost half their population before the first thaw. Winters weren't measured by snowfall or temperature. They were measured by how many people survived them, by who had enough firewood, enough grain, enough luck, by how thick your cloak was, how many rats you caught, how close your family was willing to sleep. You close your eyes and think about that, not in a grim way, but in a deeply human one. Because you also know this. People adapted, they learned, they innovated, they shared beds, walls, stories, warmth. They wove layers not just from wool, but from tradition and resilience. They didn't survive by outmuscling the cold, they survived by outsmarting it. And you? Well, you've learnt the tricks. You know to heat the bricks by the fire. You know that bed curtains aren't for show, and that 3 people in a bed is normal, not scandalous. You know what furs to sleep under, what layers to keep on, and when to pee in a pot rather than risk hypothermia walking to the garderobe. Fringe fact, some castle households had warming rooms, where servants rotated through the night to keep coals burning and supplies hot. These weren't cosy lounges, they were strategic survival spaces, the medieval version of central heating, powered by tired humans and a deep-seated fear of dying in your sleep from cold toes. You stretch under your blanket. Your joints are sore, your shoulders a little hunched, but your body has adjusted. The first few nights were brutal, but now the rough linens, the smoky air, even the chill in your fingers feel like familiar companions rather than enemies. You've developed medieval instincts, like always checking the wind direction when you hear a shutter bang, or mentally measuring a room by how many bodies it could fit if things got desperate. There's some scholarly debate, of course, about whether medieval people were always cold, or whether they just had a different tolerance than we do. Did they even think of it as suffering? Or was it simply part of life, like mud, fleas, or political instability? Some argue they were tougher. Others say they were just constantly uncomfortable and got really good at ignoring it. You're starting to think it's both. Because here's the thing, you did survive. Not just physically, but mentally. You've endured the endless nights, the smoky rooms, the chorus of snores and prayers and chickens in inappropriate places. You've slept beside hearths and pigs, monks and ghosts. And here you are, still breathing, still warm, still stubbornly human. The fire sighs in the hearth, the last of the coals whispering their way into ash. You listen to the stone breathe. You know that when you wake it'll be cold again. That the same wind will claw at the shutters, and the bed will feel just a little too damp, and your back will ache in ways that make you question the structural integrity of your spine. But you also know you'll manage. You'll heat the stone, you'll wrap the wool tighter, you'll press closer to whoever shares your bed, whether it's a friend, a servant, or a disgruntled sheep. Because that's the real secret to surviving winter in a medieval castle. You don't do it alone. You survive it one layered night at a time, one ember at a time, one warm shoulder at a time. And in the deep, cold dark of these ancient walls, that might be the warmest truth of all. So here we are. The fire's nothing but a whisper now, just a glow hiding under the last curls of ash, the kind you don't even bother poking because you know it's done. You're done too. 30 nights, 30 different beds, and probably 30 layers of wool wrapped around every inch of your medieval sleep-deprived body. And somehow, despite every drafty corridor, icy bedchamber and pig snoring in your ear, you made it. You've slept in towers, halls, barns, monasteries, and literal piles of hay. You've been warm, cold, drenched, smoked out, smothered by furs, and occasionally spooned by livestock. You've learned what makes a bed medieval. Not just straw and feathers, but fire, fabric, people, and an unwavering will to not freeze to death in your sleep. You've seen how the rhythms of life shape the rhythms of rest, how prayer interrupted dreams, how fear sharpened your ears, and how togetherness, more than anything, kept people alive. And sure, the comfort level never quite hit spa grade. Your mattress often had more creatures living in it than you'd care to think about. But each night carried its own kind of peace, its own story, its own small miracle, survival. So now, as you lie back one last time and pull your imaginary bed curtains closed, you let the silence settle in. No winter night, no bells. Just you, wrapped in centuries of memory, drifting off to sleep with a little more appreciation for every warm blanket in your modern life. And when someone asks you tomorrow, how did people sleep in those cold, drafty castles? You'll smile and say, very carefully, and with a lot of wool, now rest easy, you've earned it.